The alien queen's pheromone kills all males of her species, but it makes humans stronger. Greg Porter, human diplomat on the Wadi homeworld, watches in horror as male Wadi collapse around him. Bodies litter the streets of the capital city, victims of Queen Zalara's lethal biochemical assault. Yet Greg stands unaffected, a surge of vitality coursing through his veins. Screams and panicked cries fill the air as surviving female Wadi flee or pledge allegiance to their ruthless monarch. Greg's muscles tense, newfound strength thrumming beneath his skin. He sprints down the debris-strewn boulevard, leaping over fallen Wadi with ease. A young female Wadi bursts from an alleyway, terror etched on her face. She collides with Greg, recoiling at the sight of an alien. "Stay back," she hisses, brandishing a jagged piece of metal. "I won't hurt you," Greg says, raising his hands. "I'm Greg Porter, human diplomat. What's happening?" Before she can respond, heavy footfalls approach. A squad of Wadi guards rounds the corner, weapons raised. "Halt! By order of Queen Zalara!" The female Wadi tenses to flee, but Greg steps forward. "Run!" he tells her. "I'll hold them off." The guards open fire. Greg moves with impossible speed, dodging energy bolts and closing the distance. He slams into the first guard, sending him flying. The others fall in rapid succession, no match for Greg's enhanced strength and reflexes. Panting, Greg turns to find the female Wadi staring in awe. "How did you do that?" she asks. "I don't know," Greg admits. "The pheromone that killed the males. It's made me stronger somehow." "I'm Faye," she says, lowering her makeshift weapon. "Zalara plans to use the pheromone on other worlds. Billions will die if we don't stop her." Greg's jaw clenches. "Then we have to stop her. Can you get me into the palace?" Faye nods reluctantly. "It's our only hope, but we'll have to fight our way through the city. Some males have found ways to resist the pheromone temporarily. They've gone mad, attacking anyone they see." As if on cue, a group of male Wadi emerge from a nearby building. Their eyes are wild, faces contorted in rage. They charge at Greg and Faye, howling incoherently. Greg pushes Faye behind him. "Stay close," he orders, then meets the attack head-on. He moves with fluid grace, each blow precise and devastating. Within moments, the crazed males lie unconscious at his feet. Faye gapes at the display of power. "Maybe we have a chance after all," she murmurs. They set off through the chaotic streets, Greg's enhanced senses on high alert. The city's alien architecture looms overhead, its sweeping curves and crystalline spires, a stark contrast to the devastation below. Dead Wadi litter every street and plaza, a grim reminder of Zalara's ruthlessness. As they near the palace, they spot a landing pad where Wadi guards prepare sleek transport ships. "They're getting ready to leave," Faye whispers, "to spread the pheromone to other worlds." Greg's eyes narrow, focused on the distant figure of Queen Zalara overseeing the preparations. "Not if I can help it," he growls. "It's time to end this. Are you ready?" Faye nods, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Together they move towards the palace, humanity's unexpected champion and his unlikely ally preparing to confront the alien queen and prevent galactic genocide. Greg and Faye pressed forward, their eyes locked on the distant silhouette of the palace. As they rounded a corner, they collided with a group of figures emerging from the shadows of a collapsed building. Greg instinctively pushed Faye behind him, muscles coiled to strike. "Wait," a female voice called out. "We're not your enemies." A slender Wadi stepped into the light, her scales shimmering with an iridescent sheen. She held up her hands in a gesture of peace, flanked by a dozen other Wadi of various ages and builds. "I'm Zara," she said, her multifaceted eyes studying Greg with intense curiosity. "You're human?" Greg nodded, relaxing his stance slightly. "Greg Porter, diplomat. This is Faye. We're trying to stop Zalara." Zara's eyes widen. "A human? Here?" She glanced at her companions, then back to Greg. "How are you still alive? The pheromone—" "It doesn't affect me the same way," Greg explained. "It seems to make me stronger, faster." Faye stepped forward. "He's incredible. I've seen him take down guards single-handedly." Zara's expression shifted from suspicion to cautious hope. Perhaps the universe has granted us an unexpected ally. She gestured to her group. We're resistance fighters. I'm a scientist. We've been working on a counter-agent to Zalara's pheromone. Greg's heart raced with renewed purpose. Have you succeeded? Zara's mandibles clicked in frustration. Partially. We can protect males temporarily, but it's not strong enough to fully neutralize the bioweapon. She pointed towards the palace. The equipment we need to perfect it is in a research facility within the palace grounds. Greg exchanged a glance with Faye, an unspoken agreement passing between them. We'll help you get in, he said. As Zara outlined the layout of the facility, Greg found his attention divided. The pheromone's effects seemed to be intensifying, sharpening his senses. He was acutely aware of Faye's presence beside him, the subtle shifts of her body, the cadence of her breathing. Their eyes met, and a jolt of electricity passed between them. Zara's voice snapped him back to focus. We'll use the underground passage to infiltrate the facility, but we need a diversion at the main gate. Greg nodded, pushing aside the distraction of his growing attraction to Faye. We can handle that. The plan came together quickly. As Greg and Faye approached the palace gates, adrenaline surged through his veins. He could feel the enhanced strength humming beneath his skin, his muscles coiled like springs. Ready? He asked Faye. She nodded, her eyes bright with perseverance. Let's do this. Greg burst into action, moving faster than he ever thought possible. He vaulted over the first line of guards, sending them sprawling with precise strikes. Energy bolts sizzled past him, but he dodged them with preternatural agility. Faye darted between the chaos, using her smaller size to evade capture. Together, they drew the attention of the entire gatehouse, allowing Zara and her team to slip unnoticed into the underground passage. As more guards poured from the palace, Greg realized they were becoming overwhelmed. He grabbed Faye's hand. We need to move. They sprinted across the courtyard, guards in hot pursuit. Greg's enhanced senses took in every detail. The smooth texture of the alien stonework, the acrid smell of discharged energy weapons, the rapid beating of Faye's heart. They found themselves backed against the towering palace wall, surrounded on all sides. Greg made a split-second decision. He wrapped an arm around Faye's waist. Hold on tight, he said. Before she could respond, he channeled every ounce of his newfound strength into his legs and leaped. They soared over the massive wall, the ground falling away beneath them. For a moment, they were suspended in the air, the alien city spread out before them. They landed hard in the palace gardens, rolling to absorb the impact. As they came to a stop, Greg found himself on top of Faye, their faces inches apart. The world seemed to pause, the chaos of their situation fading into the background. Faye's eyes searched his face, her breath coming in short gasps. Greg felt an overwhelming urge to close the distance between them. The pheromone surged through his system, heightening every sensation. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, months of tension and the intensity of their current situation pouring out in a moment of connection. Greg's enhanced physiology made every touch electric, every sensation amplified. The moment was shattered by the blaring of alarms. They broke apart, reality crashing back in. Zara's team must have been discovered. We need to find them, Faye said, her voice husky. Greg nodded, helping her to her feet. As they navigated the twisting paths of the garden, he grappled with the intensity of his feelings. The pheromone was affecting him more strongly now, not just physically, but emotionally. His attraction to Faye burned like a supernova, threatening to overwhelm his focus on the mission. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of male Wadi. Greg tensed, ready for a fight. But these Wadi were different. They swayed on their feet, clearly weakened, but very much alive. Please, one of them croaked. Help us. Greg recognized the effects of Zara's partial antidote. These survivors were clinging to life, but barely. The decision before them was agonizing. Help these victims or press on to aid Zara and potentially save countless more lives. Time was running out. Somewhere in the research facility, Zara and her team were fighting to create an antidote that could save billions. But the suffering of the Wadi before them was immediate and visceral. Greg looked at Faye, seeing his own conflict mirrored in her eyes. The fate of worlds hung in the balance, and they stood at the crossroads, forced to make an impossible choice. Greg's heart wrenched as he looked at the suffering Wadi before him, but he knew what had to be done. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "We have to stop Solara. It's the only way to save everyone." Faye nodded, her eyes reflecting the same painful drive. They turned away from the weakened males and pressed on towards the research facility, the weight of their decision heavy on their shoulders. As they approached the imposing structure, Greg's enhanced senses detected an increase in guard activity. "We can't go in through the main entrance," he whispered to Faye. "There's too many of them." Faye scanned the building's exterior, her eyes landing on a high window. "What about up there?" Greg followed her gaze and nodded. "Hold on tight," he said, crouching down so Faye could climb onto his back. With Faye secured, Greg approached the wall. He marveled at the strength coursing through his muscles as he began to climb. His fingers found purchase on the smallest of protrusions, his enhanced body easily supporting both their weights as he scaled the smooth surface. They slipped through the window and found themselves in a vast laboratory. Rows of complex equipment lined the walls, and vials of mysterious substances glowed with an otherworldly light. Greg helped Faye down, and they began to search for any sign of Zara and her team. Suddenly, a familiar voice reached Greg's ears. "Solara," he mouthed to Faye, pointing towards an adjacent room. They crept closer, pressing themselves against the wall to listen. "Tell me about the antidote," Solara's voice dripped with malice. "How close are you to neutralizing my pheromone?" A pained groan answered her. "We'll never help you," a male voice responded defiantly. "Oh, you will," Solara purred. "But no matter. Soon I'll have something far more potent, a pheromone that affects not just Wadi, but humans as well. Your diplomats think they're safe? We'll see how they fare when their own kind turns against them." Greg's blood ran cold. He locked eyes with Faye, seeing his own shock mirrored in her face. Earth was Zalara's next target. Before they could process this revelation, alarms blared throughout the facility. Zalara cursed and rushed out of the room with her guards, leaving her prisoner behind. Greg and Faye sprang into action. They entered the room to find a battered Wadi male strapped to a chair. Greg easily snapped the restraints, his enhanced strength making quick work of the bonds. "I'm Krell," the Wadi gasped as Faye helped him to his feet. "Zara's assistant. The others are trapped in a secure lab section. We need Zalara's original formula to complete the antidote." Greg's mind raced. "Okay, new plan. I'll create a diversion. Faye, you and Krell find that formula. We'll meet back here in 15 minutes. Faye grabbed his arm before he could leave. "Be careful," she said, her eyes searching his. Greg nodded, then took off down the corridor. He marveled at his speed as he zipped through the facility, setting off alarms and engaging guards at various points. With each confrontation, he found his strength and agility increasing. He took down 5 guards at once, moving so fast they could barely track his movements. Meanwhile, Faye and Krell navigated the winding hallways of the research wing. They ducked into alcoves and empty rooms, narrowly avoiding patrolling guards. Finally, they reached a heavily secured door labeled Private Laboratory, Queen Zalera. Faye examined the control panel. "I can bypass this," she said, her fingers flying over the alien interface. "But it'll take time." Krell kept watch as Faye worked. Suddenly, he held up a hand for silence. 2 of Zalara's scientists walked by, deep in conversation. "The Queen wants the human test subject prepared immediately," one said. "She believes studying the pheromone's effect on him will be crucial for the attack on Earth." Faye's eyes widened in horror. Greg was in even more danger than they'd realized. She redoubled her efforts on the encryption, her heart pounding. Back in the main laboratory, Greg found himself surrounded by a group of elite Wadi guards. Their energy weapons hummed ominously as they closed in. Just as Greg prepared for what seemed like an impossible fight, the door behind the guards burst open. Zara and her team poured into the room, catching the guards off guard. Greg seized the moment, using his superhuman speed to disarm the nearest guards before they could react. Together with the resistance fighters, they made short work of Zalara's elite force. "Greg!" Zara called out as the last guard fell. "Where are the others?" Before Greg could answer, the main door slid open. Zalara stood there, a sinister device clutched in her clawed hand. Her eyes locked onto Greg with predatory focus. "Excellent," she hissed. "The perfect test subject." Time seemed to slow as Zalara activated the device. A concentrated mist of pheromones shot towards Greg. In that split second, he had to decide, dodge and risk the blast hitting one of his allies, or face it head-on and gamble with the unknown effects on his human physiology. Greg's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. The choice he made would determine not just his fate, but potentially that of Earth itself. The pheromone mist hung in the air, suspended in that moment of decision, as Greg prepared to move. Greg's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. In that split second, he made his choice. Instead of dodging, he stood his ground, facing the concentrated mist of pheromones head-on. The shimmering cloud enveloped him, seeping into his skin and filling his lungs. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then a rush of sensation flooded through Greg's body. His muscles swelled, his senses sharpened beyond anything he'd experienced before. The room came into hyper-focus, every detail crisp and clear. Zalara's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible," she hissed, retreating behind her guards. Greg flexed his hands, marveling at the newfound strength coursing through him. He could hear the rapid heartbeats of everyone in the room, smell the acrid tang of fear emanating from Zalara's guards. "It's over, Zalara," Greg said, his voice resonating with power. Before anyone could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. Zara's communicator crackled to life. "We've got it!" Faye's voice came through, breathless with excitement. "The formula's been transmitted. Zara, can you synthesize the antidote?" Zara's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed the information flooding her datapad. "Yes, I can do it, but I'll need time." Greg stepped forward, placing himself between Zalara's forces and Zara's team. "You'll have it," he said. With lightning speed, Greg launched himself at the nearest guard. His enhanced strength sent the Wadi flying across the room, crashing into a bank of computers. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, but Greg dodged them effortlessly, moving faster than the eye could track. As the battle raged, Zara worked feverishly, her skilled hands mixing compounds with practiced precision. Within minutes, she had produced a small batch of the enhanced antidote. "It's ready," she called out. Greg created an opening, allowing Zara to dash out of the lab. She made her way to the weakened male Wadi fighters they had encountered earlier, administering the antidote with swift efficiency. The effect was almost instantaneous. Color returned to the males' faces, their postures straightening as strength flowed back into their limbs. They joined the fray, their renewed vigor adding crucial support to the resistance fighters. Meanwhile, Faye and Krell arrived at the lab, their faces flushed with the thrill of success. Faye's eyes widened as she took in Greg's transformed appearance, his muscles rippling with each powerful movement. "Greg," she breathed, a mix of awe and concern in her voice. He turned to her, managing a quick smile before refocusing on the battle. "Stay back," he warned. "I've got this." True to his word, Greg was a force of nature. He moved through Zalara's elite guards like a whirlwind, disarming them with ease and withstanding direct hits from their energy weapons without flinching. Faye, inspired by Greg's bravery, refused to stand idle. She darted to a nearby control panel, her fingers flying over the alien interface. Alarms blared as security systems went haywire, trapping groups of enemy soldiers behind force fields. Zalara, seeing her forces crumble, snarled in frustration. She clutched a vial of the human-enhancing pheromone and made a break for the exit. Greg's enhanced senses picked up her movement instantly. "She's getting away!" he shouted, leaping over the heads of the remaining guards. Greg pursued Zalara through the twisting corridors of the facility, his enhanced speed allowing him to close the gap quickly. He smashed through walls and vaulted over obstacles, the structure groaning under the force of his passage. Zalara reached a launch bay, racing towards a sleek ship poised for takeoff. Greg burst into the hangar just as she was about to board. "It's over, Zalara," Greg called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The Wadi Queen turned, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and defiance. In a desperate move, she activated another pheromone device, releasing a concentrated dose directly at Greg. Instead of incapacitating him, the additional exposure sent a surge of power through his system. Greg's muscles bulged, his senses sharpening even further. He felt invincible, untouchable. Zalara's mandibles clicked rapidly as she realized her mistake. She took a step back, her composure cracking. "Wait," she said, her voice taking on a silky tone. "Perhaps we've been too hasty. I see now the potential of your species." Greg paused, wary of her sudden change in demeanor. Zalara continued, her eyes roving over Greg's enhanced physique. "Join me," she purred. "Become my mate. Together we could create a new, stronger Wadi species. Your DNA, combined with ours. Imagine the possibilities." For a moment, Greg hesitated. The rush of power flowing through him was intoxicating. The thought of wielding such strength on a galactic scale, tempting. He could reshape worlds, become more than human. Just then, Faye burst into the launch bay, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. Her heart sank as she saw the look of consideration on Greg's face. "Greg!" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The sound of Faye's voice snapped Greg back to reality. He looked at her, then back at Zalara, his determination hardening. "No," he said firmly. "I won't betray my own species or the trust of my allies. Your reign ends here, Zalara." With lightning speed, Greg closed the distance between them. Zalara tried to activate her ship's defenses, but Greg was faster. He restrained her with ease, careful not to harm her despite his overwhelming strength. As if on cue, Wadi security forces loyal to the resistance poured into the launch bay, taking the deposed queen into custody. The facility echoed with the sounds of cheering as word of Zalara's capture spread. Greg felt the surge of power begin to ebb, his muscles returning to their normal size. Exhaustion washed over him, but a sense of triumph buoyed his spirit. Faye approached him, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and something deeper. "You did it," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Greg smiled, about to respond when a sharp pain lanced through his head. He stumbled, the world spinning around him as the last of the pheromone's effects wore off. "Greg!" Faye cried out, supporting him as he swayed on his feet. As the adrenaline of the battle faded, Greg realized the true cost of his enhanced state. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. But even as fatigue threatened to overwhelm him, he knew their work was not nearly finished. Zara approached, her mandibles clicking excitedly. "We need to distribute the antidote across the planet," she said, "and there's much to discuss about the future of Wadi-human relations." Greg nodded, straightening up despite his exhaustion. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders once more, but now it was tinged with the possibility of a brighter future for both species. As they made their way back to the main laboratory, Greg's mind raced with the implications of what had transpired. The battle was won, but new challenges and decisions lay ahead. The path forward was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. Potential and peril. As Greg contemplated their next steps, a familiar voice crackled through his communicator. "Agent Sullivan, this is Earth Command. Report your status immediately." Greg exchanged glances with Faye and Zara before responding. "Earth Command, this is Sullivan, mission successful. Queen Zalara has been neutralized, and we've acquired critical intel on the pheromone technology." There was a pause before the voice returned, tight with urgency. "Excellent work, Sullivan. You are to return to Earth immediately for debriefing and medical examination. Prepare for immediate extraction." Greg's heart sank as he looked at Faye. The thought of leaving her behind after all they'd been through felt wrong. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. "Earth Command, I have a condition for my return," Greg said, his voice firm. "I request permission to bring Faye, a Wadi ally, as a cultural ambassador. Her insights will be invaluable to our understanding of the situation." Silence stretched over the comm channel. Greg could almost hear the furious debates happening light years away. Finally, the voice returned, tinged with reluctance. "Request granted, Agent Sullivan. Prepare for pickup in 30 minutes." As Greg relayed the news to Faye, Her compound eyes widened with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Leave, Wadi. I've never been off-world before." Greg placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, ignoring the slight tingle that ran through his arm at the contact. "You'll be fine. I'll be with you every step of the way." The next half hour passed in a blur of hurried goodbyes and hasty preparations. Before they knew it, Greg and Faye were boarding the sleek Earth shuttle, its engines humming with impossibly strong power. As they strapped in for the journey, Greg felt a surge of strength course through his body. His muscles tightened and his senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. He glanced at Faye, seated next to him, and felt his heart rate spike. The proximity to her seemed to trigger these episodes, a lingering effect of Zalara's concentrated pheromone dose. The shuttle broke atmosphere, and Faye gasped in wonder as her homeworld shrank beneath them. Greg found himself captivated by her reaction, the childlike awe in her eyes stirring something within him. The journey to Earth was punctuated by these surges of enhanced ability, each coinciding with moments of intense attraction to Faye. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, both acutely aware of the other's presence in the confined space of the shuttle. Upon touchdown at a high-security facility, they were immediately whisked away to separate examination rooms. Dr. Elena Reeves, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, oversaw Greg's battery of tests personally. "Fascinating," she muttered, poring over holographic readouts of Greg's DNA. "The pheromone has fundamentally altered your genetic structure. Your strength, speed, and regenerative abilities are off the charts. But these changes, they're unstable." Greg flexed his hand, watching the muscles ripple beneath his skin. "Unstable how?" Dr. Reeves tapped a series of commands into her console, bringing up a time-lapse of Greg's cellular activity. "Your enhancements fluctuate based on proximity to the Wadi female and your emotional state. It's unlike anything we've ever seen." In the adjacent lab, Faye underwent her own examinations. Through the observation window, Greg watched as scientists marveled over her unique physiology. A pang of protectiveness surged through him, triggering another enhancement episode. Dr. Reeves's eyes widened as she monitored the changes. "Incredible. Agent Sullivan, your body is producing a localized version of the pheromone. It seems to be reacting to your emotional state regarding the Wadi." Before Greg could respond, the lab doors hissed open. General Marcus Steele strode in, his posture rigid and eyes cold. "Doctor, I need your preliminary report. The Joint Chiefs are eager to know if we can replicate these enhancements." Greg's enhanced hearing picked up every word, and a chill ran down his spine. He knew that look in the general's eyes, the gleam of a man who saw a weapon, not a person. "General Steele," Greg interjected, stepping forward. "With all due respect, weaponizing this pheromone would be a grave mistake. We risk betraying the trust of the Wadi and potentially igniting an interstellar conflict." Steele's eyes narrowed. "Your opinion is noted, Agent Sullivan, but the decision isn't yours to make. Imagine an army of super soldiers giving humanity the edge in future conflicts. We'd be fools not to pursue this advantage." The tension in the room was palpable. Greg opened his mouth to argue further when Faye's voice cut through the standoff. "Perhaps there is another way," she said, stepping into the lab. All eyes turned to her as she continued, her voice gaining confidence. "I propose a compromise. Allow me to work with your scientists to develop a controlled version of the pheromone, one that enhances human abilities without the risks of unintended consequences." The proposal hung in the air, a potential olive branch between two colliding worldviews. Dr. Reeves was the first to break the silence, her eyes alight with scientific curiosity. "It's possible. With the Wadi's cooperation, we could make significant breakthroughs in controlled human enhancement." General Steele's lips pursed, but even he couldn't deny the potential of Faye's offer. "Very well," he growled. "You have 1 month to show progress. After that, we reassess our options." As Steele stormed out, Greg felt a wave of relief wash over him. He turned to Faye, a mixture of gratitude and admiration in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. Faye's mandibles clicked in what Greg had come to recognize as a smile. "We're in this together now," she replied. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of research and collaboration. Greg and Faye worked side by side with Dr. Reeves, their proximity causing Greg's abilities to manifest more consistently. The constant contact led to a deepening of their bond, stolen glances turning into lingering touches. Late one night, as they pored over cellular decay rates, the tension between them finally boiled over. In a secluded corner of the lab, hidden from prying eyes, Greg and Faye shared a passionate kiss. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through Greg's enhanced system, his skin tingling with energy. As they broke apart, both breathless, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Security footage flashed on nearby screens, showing a group of masked intruders breaching the outer perimeter. Greg's muscles tensed, power surging through him as he prepared to defend Faye and their work. He knew that whatever came next would test not only his enhanced abilities, but also the fragile trust between humans and Wadi. As the sound of boots echoed down the corridor, Greg steeled himself for the fight ahead, acutely aware that the fate of two worlds might hinge on the outcome of this confrontation. Battle. As the sound of boots echoed down the corridor, Greg's enhanced senses kicked into overdrive. He could hear the intruders' rapid heartbeats, smell the acrid scent of their sweat, and feel the vibrations of their movements through the floor. "Faye, we need to secure the research," Greg said, his voice low and urgent. "I'll handle the intruders." Faye nodded, her compound eyes reflecting the flashing red emergency lights. "Be careful, Greg." As Faye rushed to safeguard their data, Greg stepped into the corridor. His muscles tensed, power surging through his body as he prepared for confrontation. The security footage had shown masked figures, but as they rounded the corner, Greg recognized the insignia on their tactical gear. Earth First, a radical anti-alien organization. The lead intruder raised his weapon, but Greg was already in motion. With inhuman speed, he closed the distance between them. His enhanced strength made the confrontation almost comically one-sided. Greg disarmed the first attacker with a quick twist, using the man's own momentum to slam him into the wall. Two more Earth First operatives rushed forward. Greg ducked under a wild swing, his fist connecting with one attacker's solar plexus. The man crumpled, gasping for air. The other managed to land a glancing blow, but Greg barely felt it. He retaliated with a palm strike that sent the intruder flying back several feet. As Greg neutralized the threats in the corridor, his enhanced hearing picked up the sound of breaking glass from the main laboratory. His heart raced as he realized Faye was in danger. He sprinted back, covering the distance in seconds. Greg burst into the lab to find Faye facing off against an Earth First operative. To his surprise and admiration, she was holding her own. Faye's Wadi physiology gave her a natural agility that she used to great effect, dodging the intruder's clumsy attacks. As Greg watched, she grabbed a nearby beaker and smashed it against her attacker's head, stunning him. "But, Faye!" Greg called out, drawing her attention. Together, they quickly subdued the remaining intruder. As the adrenaline of the fight faded, Greg and Faye found themselves standing close, breathing heavily. The air between them crackled with tension and unspoken attraction. "Are you all right?" Greg asked, his hand gently touching Faye's arm. "Yes, thanks to you," she replied, her mandibles clicking softly in what Greg now recognized as a smile. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of security forces, their boots thundering down the hallway. As the Earth First members were apprehended, Greg's enhanced hearing picked up a familiar voice approaching. General Marcus Steele stormed into the lab, his face a mask of almost unchecked rage. "Sullivan, what the hell happened here?" Before Greg could respond, Steele continued. "This is exactly why we need to accelerate the super soldier program. If Earth First can breach our security so easily, imagine what an alien force could do." Greg felt his anger rising. "With all due respect, General, weaponizing this research is not the answer. We need to focus on its potential for medical advancements in space exploration." Naive idealism," Steele spat. "We need to be prepared for any threat, foreign or domestic." As the argument escalated, Dr. Eleanor Reeves stepped between them. "Gentlemen, please, perhaps there's a middle ground here. We could explore limited military applications while maintaining our focus on peaceful advancements." The suggestion seemed to take some of the wind out of Steele's sails, But Greg could see the general was far from satisfied. As the facility slowly returned to normal, a new figure entered the lab. Ambassador Lee Clark, a petite woman with a commanding presence, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. "Agent Sullivan, Dr. Fay," she said, nodding to each of them. "I've just received word from both Earth and Wadi High Commands. News of this attack and your successful defense has spread quickly." Greg and Fay exchanged glances, uncertain of what this meant. Ambassador Lee continued, "Both species recognize the potential benefits of closer collaboration. They've proposed a goodwill tour, with you two as the face of human-Wadi cooperation." "A tour?" Fay asked, her antennae twitching with interest. "Yes," Lee explained. "You would visit key locations on both Earth and Wadi, promoting interspecies understanding and continuing your research under joint protection." Greg considered the proposal. It was an opportunity to advance their work and potentially prevent further conflicts. Plus, the thought of spending more time with Fay sent a pleasant tingle through his enhanced nervous system. "We'll do it," Greg said, looking to Fay for confirmation. She nodded in agreement. As they began preparations for the tour, Greg felt another surge of his abilities. His skin tingled, senses sharpening to an almost painful degree. But this time, the enhancement was accompanied by an overwhelming wave of attraction towards Fay. The intensity of his feelings both thrilled and unsettled him. Later that evening, as Greg packed for their journey, he couldn't shake a sense of unease. The attack had been thwarted, but he knew Earth First wouldn't give up so easily. As he zipped up his bag, he made a silent vow to protect Fay and their research at any expense. Unbeknownst to Greg and Fay, in a dimly lit room across the city, Colonel Victor Hawthorne, leader of Earth First, was already planning their next move. He stared at a holographic display showing Greg and Fay's images, his eyes cold with willpower. "This goodwill tour is the perfect opportunity," Hawthorne said to his assembled lieutenants. "We'll show the world the true danger of this alien corruption. Sullivan and his Wadi pet won't know what hit them." As the Earth First operatives began their preparations, Greg and Fay boarded their transport for the first stop on their tour. The couple sat close together, the hum of the engines masking their quiet conversation. Neither was fully aware of the challenges that lay ahead, or how their deepening bond would be tested in the coming days. As the transport hummed beneath them, Greg found himself acutely aware of Fay's presence beside him. The events of the past few weeks had brought them closer, forging a bond that transcended species. Their first stop was New Geneva, a sprawling metropolis that had become Earth's de facto capital for interplanetary affairs. The city buzzed with anticipation as delegates from around the world gathered for the International Conference on Interspecies Cooperation. As their vehicle approached the conference center, Greg's enhanced vision picked up on the heightened security measures. Armored vehicles lined the streets, and uniformed personnel scanned the crowds with watchful eyes. "Looks like they're not taking any chances after the lab attack," Greg murmured to Fay. Fay's antennae twitched in response. "Perhaps it's for the best. We must ensure the safety of all attendees." The conference hall was a marvel of modern architecture, its sweeping glass facade reflecting the bustling city around it. As Greg and Fay made their way inside, they were immediately swarmed by a mix of eager scientists, curious diplomats, and pushy journalists. Dr. Eleanor Reeves appeared at their side, deftly maneuvering them through the crowd. "Remember," she whispered, "stick to the script. We want to highlight the potential benefits without raising too many alarms." Greg nodded, feeling a familiar tingle as his abilities responded to the heightened stress. He took a deep breath, focusing on Fay's calming presence beside him. The keynote presentation was held in the grand auditorium, filled to capacity with an audience hanging on their every word. Greg began by outlining the accidental discovery of the Wadi pheromone and its effects on human physiology. Fay followed, explaining the potential applications in medicine and space exploration. As Greg moved to the practical demonstration portion of their presentation, he felt another surge of power coursing through his veins. His skin prickled with energy as he gripped the podium, intending to show how the enhanced strength could aid in search and rescue operations. Without warning, the metal crumpled beneath his fingers like tinfoil. A collective gasp rose from the audience as Greg stared at the mangled podium in shock. Faye, sensing the shift in mood, quickly stepped forward. She placed a hand on Greg's arm, releasing a subtle mist of her natural calming pheromones. The effect was almost instantaneous. Greg felt his racing heart slow, his muscles relaxing as he regained control. As you can see, Faye addressed the stunned audience, her voice steady, the partnership between our species is crucial in managing and understanding these enhanced abilities. The incident became the talk of the conference, sparking heated debates about the potential risks and benefits of the pheromone technology. As Greg and Faye fielded questions from the press, a distinguished Japanese man approached them. Agent Sullivan, Dr. Faye, he said, bowing slightly. I'm Dr. Akira Tanaka, geneticist specializing in human enhancement. I wonder if I might have a word with you in private. Once in a secluded room, Dr. Tanaka expressed his concerns. Agent Sullivan, the changes to your physiology are unprecedented. I fear we may be overlooking potential long-term effects on your DNA. With your permission, I'd like to conduct a series of tests to ensure your continued well-being. Greg exchanged a glance with Faye before nodding. Of course, Doctor. I admit I've had similar concerns myself. As Dr. Tanaka began his examination, the calm of the conference center was shattered by a series of explosions. Alarms blared as panicked screams filled the air. Greg's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of boots on marble and the familiar click of weapons being readied. Earth first, he growled, recognizing the tactical formations from their previous encounter. Before Greg could move, a strange mist began seeping into the room. His enhanced senses detected an odd cloying scent that reminded him of Zalara's original pheromone. Around him, human males began to collapse, their bodies convulsing. Greg felt a momentary wave of dizziness, but his altered physiology quickly adapted. He turned to see Faye already in motion, her wadi reflexes allowing her to evade the mist. It's a weaponized version of the pheromone, Faye said, her voice tight with concern. We need to neutralize it quickly. Greg nodded, his muscles tensing as he prepared for action. I'll handle the Earth First operatives. You and Dr. Tanaka work on an antidote. With that, Greg burst into the corridor, his enhanced speed allowing him to move faster than the human eye could track. He quickly assessed the situation. Earth First operatives were spreading throughout the building, using the chaos to their advantage. Greg's fist connected with the first attacker's jaw, sending him flying across the room. He moved swiftly from one opponent to the next, his enhanced strength and speed making short work of the extremists. As he fought, Greg caught glimpses of Faye and Dr. Tanaka working furiously in an impromptu lab, combining their knowledge of wadi and human biology to counteract the weaponized pheromone. Suddenly, a new figure entered the fray. Colonel Victor Hawthorne, leader of Earth First, stood at the end of the hallway. His eyes gleamed with a familiar intensity that Greg recognized all too well. Sullivan, Hawthorne sneered, his muscles bulging unnaturally beneath his tactical gear. Let's see how you fare against someone on your level. The two enhanced humans clashed in a blur of motion, their fight taking them through walls and across rooms. Greg soon realized that Hawthorne had used a diluted version of the pheromone on himself, granting him similar abilities. As they grappled, Hawthorne leaned in close. You're fighting on the wrong side, Sullivan. We obtained Zalara's original samples from friends in high places. Imagine what we could do with an army of enhanced humans. Greg's response was a headbutt that sent Hawthorne staggering back. The fight continued, pushing Greg to his limits as he struggled to overpower the Earth First leader. Meanwhile, Faye and Dr. Tanaka had succeeded in creating a rudimentary antidote. Faye moved swiftly through the conference center, administering the treatment to the affected humans. One by one, the victims began to stir, coughing and gasping as they regained consciousness. The tide of the battle turned as security forces, no longer incapacitated by the weaponized pheromone, joined the fight against Earth First. Greg finally gained the upper hand against Hawthorne, landing a devastating blow that sent the colonel crashing through a window. As the dust settled, Greg rushed to Faye's side, his eyes scanning her for any signs of injury. The relief he felt at seeing her unharmed was palpable. Their moment of respite was short-lived as General Marcus Steele strode into the conference center, flanked by a heavily armed military task force. His eyes swept over the destruction before settling on Greg and Faye. This, Steele said, his voice hard, is exactly why we need to accelerate our research. Earth must be prepared to defend itself, by any means necessary. Greg opened his mouth to argue, but Faye placed a restraining hand on his arm. They both knew that this incident had changed everything. The debate over the future of human-alien relations and the ethical use of the pheromone technology was about to reach a fever pitch. As they prepared to face the onslaught of questions from the press and the demands of world leaders, Greg and Faye found strength in each other's presence. They had survived this attack, but both sensed that it was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. Unknown to them, on a distant Wadi outpost, a group of extremists led by Vexa, a former associate of Zalara, watched the events unfold with growing interest. Vexa's compound eyes narrowed as she studied the images of Greg and Faye. "Prepare our ship," she chittered to her followers. "It's time we put an end to this misguided alliance." As Greg and Faye steeled themselves for the next leg of their tour, unaware of the new threat looming on the horizon, the stakes of their mission grew ever higher. The fate of two worlds now rested on their shoulders, and the true test of their partnership was yet to come. As the dust settled from the attack on the conference center, Greg and Faye found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of debriefings, press conferences, and hasty strategy meetings. The incident had shaken the foundations of human-Wadi relations, and both Earth and Wadi authorities were scrambling to maintain the fragile alliance. Amid the chaos, Dr. Elena Reeves approached them with news that would change the course of their mission. "The Wadi High Council has agreed to host the next leg of your tour on their homeworld," she announced, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is unprecedented. No human has ever set foot on Wadi Prime." Greg exchanged a glance with Faye, sensing both anticipation and apprehension in her antenna's subtle movements. He felt a familiar tingle of enhanced awareness as he considered the implications of this development. "When do we leave?" he asked, already mentally preparing for the journey. "In 48 hours, Dr. Reeves replied. "Dr. Tanaka will accompany you to continue monitoring your condition, Agent Sullivan." As they boarded the interstellar transport 2 days later, Greg couldn't shake a sense of unease. His abilities had been fluctuating more frequently since the attack, and the prospect of visiting an alien world filled him with both excitement and trepidation. The journey to Wadi Prime took several days, during which Dr. Tanaka ran a battery of tests on Greg. "Your physiology is continuing to change at an accelerated rate," the geneticist reported, frowning at his holographic displays. "We need to closely monitor your exposure to Wadi pheromones during this visit." Upon their arrival, Greg's enhanced senses were immediately overwhelmed by the alien environment. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, and the gravity felt slightly off. A crowd of Wadi citizens had gathered to witness the historic moment, their compound eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and wariness. A familiar figure stepped forward from the welcoming committee. "Greg? Faye?" Zara greeted them, her antennae twitching in a gesture of warmth. "Welcome to our world." As Zara led them through the capital city, Greg marveled at the organic architecture that seemed to grow from the very ground. Faye provided running commentary, explaining the intricacies of Wadi culture and technology to her human companions. Their tour culminated in a public demonstration of human-Wadi cooperation at the Central Plaza. As Greg took the stage alongside Faye, he felt a sudden surge of power coursing through his body. His skin prickled with energy, and his vision sharpened to an almost painful degree. Before he could warn Faye, Greg's enhanced strength manifested in a burst of uncontrolled energy. The stage beneath his feet cracked and buckled, and nearby structures groaned under the pressure of his inadvertent display of power. Panic rippled through the Wadi audience. Greg struggled to regain control, his heart racing as he realized the damage he had caused. Then he felt Faye's hand on his arm, a subtle mist of pheromones enveloping him. Almost immediately, the surge of power receded, leaving Greg shaken but stable. "Are you all right?" Faye asked, her voice low and concerned. Greg nodded, acutely aware of the alarm murmurs from the crowd. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. Before Faye could respond, a commotion near the back of the plaza caught their attention. A group of Wadi protesters had unfurled banners denouncing the human presence on their world. Greg's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of their angry chittering. "Danger to our people. corruption of our way of life. As security forces moved to contain the protesters, Zara approached Greg and Faye. Perhaps it would be best to continue our tour in a more controlled environment, she suggested, her antennae twitching nervously. They retreated to a secure facility where Dr. Tanaka could run more tests on Greg. As the doctor worked, Faye paced the room, her usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. We need to understand what's causing these fluctuations, she said. The original site of Zalara's pheromone release might hold some answers. Greg nodded, feeling another tingle of heightened awareness at Faye's proximity. Let's go, he said, standing up. The sooner we figure this out, the better. As they prepared to leave for the site, none of them noticed the shadowy figure observing their movements from a hidden vantage point. Vexra's compound eyes narrowed as she watched the humans and their Wadi ally depart. She lifted a communication device to her mandibles and chittered softly. They're on the move. Prepare the next phase of our plan. Greg, Faye, and Dr. Tanaka arrived at the abandoned research facility where Zalara had conducted her fateful experiments. The structure was overgrown with alien vegetation, its once sterile corridors now a tangle of organic growth and discarded equipment. As they ventured deeper into the facility, Greg's enhanced senses picked up traces of lingering pheromones. His skin tingled with each step, and he found himself increasingly aware of Faye's presence beside him. Over here, Faye called, her antennae twitching, as she examined a partially obscured control panel. This might give us access to Zalara's research data. As Greg moved to help her, his hand brushed against hers. A jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them, and Greg suddenly found it difficult to focus on anything but Faye's proximity. Before he could process these intensified feelings, a loud hiss filled the air. Hidden vents in the walls had activated, releasing a concentrated mist of pheromones into the room. It's a security system, Dr. Tanaka shouted, quickly donning a protective mask. We must have triggered it. Greg and Faye, caught in the midst of the pheromone cloud, felt the effects immediately. Their bodies reacted to the powerful chemical influence, heightening their mutual attraction to an almost overwhelming degree. As they struggled to maintain focus on their mission, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Greg's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of approaching footsteps and weapons being readied. We've got company, he growled, trying to ignore the intoxicating scent of Faye's pheromones mingling with the security system's release. Suddenly, the far wall exploded inward, and a group of armed Wadi extremists poured into the room. At their head stood Vexra, her eyes gleaming with fanatical intensity. The abominations must be destroyed, she chittered, raising a weapon that pulsed with alien energy. Greg moved to engage the attackers, his enhanced abilities further amplified by the pheromone cloud. He dodged energy blasts with inhuman speed, closing the distance to the nearest extremist in a blur of motion. As he fought, Greg noticed something odd about some of Vexra's followers. They moved with a speed and strength that seemed unnatural, even for Wadi. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Faye, he called out, ducking under a swing from an enhanced Wadi. They're using a version of the pheromone, like Hawthorne did. Faye, who had been working furiously to secure Zalara's data and synthesize a stabilizing agent, looked up in shock. That's impossible, she gasped. Unless... Her words were cut off as another explosion rocked the facility. The unstable nature of Greg's enhanced abilities became increasingly apparent as he struggled to control his strength, inadvertently causing massive damage to the structure around them. Vexra advanced, her enhanced followers forming a barrier between her and Greg. Your presence here is an affront to Wadi purity, she hissed. We will cleanse our world of your corruption. Greg found himself cornered, his powers fluctuating dangerously as he faced down Vexra and her fanatical group. He could hear Faye working frantically behind him, racing against time to complete the stabilizing agent. As Vexra raised her weapon for a killing blow, Greg braced himself, uncertain if his unstable abilities would be enough to save him. The fate of their mission, their partnership, and potentially the future of human-Wadi relations hung in the balance as the conflict reached its climax in the heart of the abandoned facility. Abandoned research facility. Time seemed to slow as Vexra's weapon charged, its alien energy pulsing with deadly intent. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Greg! Catch!" Faye's voice snapped Greg back to reality. He turned just in time to see a small cylindrical object flying towards him. With lightning-fast reflexes, he snatched it out of the air. "Inject it now!" Faye shouted, her antennae quivering with urgency. Without hesitation, Greg plunged the auto-injector into his thigh. The effect was instantaneous. A cool sensation spread through his body, followed by a surge of clarity. The chaotic fluctuations of his enhanced abilities settled into a steady, controlled flow of power. Vexa fired her weapon, but Greg was ready. He dodged the energy blast with fluid grace, his movements precise and controlled. The extremist leader's compound eyes widened in surprise as Greg closed the distance between them in a blur of motion. "This ends now," Greg growled, disarming Vexa with a swift strike. The enhanced Wadi followers charged, but they were no match for Greg's newly stabilized abilities. He moved through their ranks with practiced efficiency, neutralizing threats without causing unnecessary harm. As the last of Vexa's followers fell, the extremist leader herself made a desperate dash for the exit. Greg moved to pursue, but a series of ominous beeps filled the air. "She's activated a self-destruct sequence," Dr. Tanaka shouted, his fingers flying over a nearby console. "We have less than 2 minutes before this entire facility collapses." Greg locked eyes with Faye across the room. "The data?" Faye nodded, holding up a small storage device. "Secured. Let's move." They raced through the crumbling facility, Greg using his enhanced strength to clear debris from their path. As they neared the exit, a support beam crashed down, blocking their escape route. Without breaking stride, Greg wrapped one arm around Faye and the other around Dr. Tanaka. "Hold on tight," he warned, before launching them through the collapsing wall and into the open air beyond. They hit the ground rolling as the facility imploded behind them, sending up a massive cloud of dust and debris. As the dust settled, Greg helped Faye and Dr. Tanaka to their feet. "Are you both okay?" he asked, scanning them for injuries. Before they could respond, the whine of approaching vehicles filled the air. A contingent of Wadi security forces materialized from the swirling dust, led by a familiar figure. Zara's antenna twitched with a mix of relief and concern as she approached. "Greg, Faye, Dr. Tanaka, thank the stars you're safe. We detected the explosion and feared the worst." Greg noticed the scientist's gaze lingering on the ruined facility. "I'm sorry about the destruction, Zara. We had no choice." Zara's compound eyes refocused on Greg. "The loss of the facility is regrettable, but your safety is paramount. However, I'm afraid this incident has caused quite a stir. It's been broadcast across our world." As if on cue, a Wadi news drone buzzed overhead, its camera fixed on the group. "We need to get you to a secure location for debriefing," Zara said, ushering them towards an awaiting transport. "There's much to discuss." The ride to the government facility was tense, filled with hurried explanations and urgent communications. Greg could feel Faye's eyes on him, her antennae twitching with unasked questions about his newfound control. Upon arrival, they were whisked into a high-security conference room. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing footage of the confrontation at the abandoned facility. Dr. Tanaka cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "While the stabilizing agent was successful, my monitoring equipment picked up some concerning readings during your exposure to the new pheromone variant." Greg felt a knot form in his stomach. "What kind of readings?" The geneticist's fingers danced over a control panel, bringing up a complex DNA model. "The data suggests that prolonged exposure to Wadi pheromones is causing further mutations in your DNA, Agent Sullivan. These changes appear to be permanent." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Greg's mind raced, considering the potential consequences of his evolving physiology. Zara broke the silence, her voice filled with a mix of scientific curiosity and diplomatic concern. "This development raises new questions about the nature of human-Wadi interactions. We must approach this carefully." As the debriefing continued, Greg found himself increasingly distracted by Faye's presence. The lingering effects of the pheromone exposure intensified his awareness of her, making it difficult to focus on the discussion at hand. Faye seemed similarly affected, her antennae twitching in Greg's direction more frequently than usual. Their eyes met across the conference table, an unspoken tension crackling between them. Zara's voice cut through Greg's distraction. "We've received word from Earth. General Marcus Steele is using news of the attack to push for increased military presence in human-Wadi cooperative efforts." Greg frowned, knowing the general's hawkish tendencies. "That could jeopardize everything we've worked for." "Indeed," Zara agreed, "which is why a group of moderate Wadi politicians has proposed a compromise. They suggest creating a joint human-Wadi research team to study the effects of the pheromones and develop safeguards against their misuse." Faye leaned forward, her antennae perked with interest. "That sounds like a step in the right direction." Zara nodded. "They've requested that you and Greg lead this initiative. It would require splitting your time between Earth and our homeworld." Before Greg could respond, a familiar tingling sensation spread across his skin. His vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid. But this time, instead of the chaotic surge of power he'd experienced before, he felt a new awareness blooming within him. The pheromones in the room seemed to come alive, visible to him as subtle currents of energy. He could sense the distinct signatures of each Wadi present, and even more surprisingly, he found he could influence those currents with his thoughts. "Greg!" Faye's voice was tinged with concern. "What's happening?" He turned to her, his eyes wide with amazement. "I can see them, Faye. The pheromones. And I think I can control them." The room erupted into excited chittering as the Wadi scientists present realized the implications of this new development. Zara's compound eyes gleamed with fascination. "This changes everything," she said, her antennae twitching rapidly. "We need to establish a specialized facility to study and train you, Greg. Somewhere remote, where we can explore the full extent of your abilities safely." As the Wadi officials began discussing logistics, an urgent message flashed across the room's main display. Greg's heart sank as he read the contents. "It's from Earth," he announced grimly. "Colonel Hawthorne and his Earth-First extremists have launched a series of attacks on key human Wadi cooperation sites. They're using weaponized pheromones." The room fell silent once more, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on all present. "They're requesting my immediate return," Greg continued, his voice tight with conflicting emotions. He locked eyes with Faye, seeing his own inner turmoil reflected in her compound gaze. The choice before them was monumental. Remain on the Wadi homeworld to explore Greg's evolving abilities, or return to Earth to combat this new threat. As they stood on the precipice of this crucial decision, Greg felt the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. Whatever path they chose would have far-reaching consequences, not only for their mission, but for the future of human-Wadi relations and his own transformation. The room waited in tense silence for their response, the fate of interspecies cooperation hanging in the balance. Balance. Greg took a deep breath, his eyes moving from Faye to Zara and back again. "We have to split up," he said, his voice heavy with tenacity. "I need to return to Earth immediately to deal with Hawthorne's attacks. Faye, you should stay here and continue our research." Faye's antennae drooped slightly, but she nodded in agreement. "You're right. We can't abandon Earth in its time of need, but our work here is crucial too." Zara stepped forward, her compound eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "I'll ensure Faye has all the resources she needs to continue the research and oversee the construction of the specialized training facility. We'll keep you updated on any developments, Greg." Within hours, Greg found himself on a high-speed transport back to Earth. As he watched the Wadi homeworld shrink in the viewport, he felt a growing unease. The absence of Faye's pheromones was already noticeable, like a faint itch beneath his skin. Upon landing, Greg was whisked away to a secure military facility. General Marcus Steele, a stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair, greeted him with a firm handshake. "Agent Sullivan, glad you're here. We're in deep trouble," Steele said, leading Greg to a situation room filled with holographic displays and bustling analysts. Dr. Helena Chen, the lead scientist on Earth's pheromone research team, approached with a worried expression. The new strain Earth First is using, it's like nothing we've seen before. It can incapacitate both humans and Wadi within seconds of exposure. Greg's eyes widened as he scanned the reports flooding in from major cities across the globe. Footage showed both humans and Wadi collapsing in the streets, their bodies convulsing as the weaponized pheromones took effect. "We need to stop this," Greg said, his fists clenching at his sides. "Where's their main base of operations?" General Steele pulled up a map on the central display. "We've traced several attacks back to this abandoned industrial complex outside of Detroit. It's heavily fortified, and our conventional forces can't get close without being affected by the pheromones." Greg nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "I can get in. My abilities should protect me from the worst of the effects, and I can sense the pheromones now, maybe even control them." Within hours, Greg found himself crouched on a rooftop overlooking the Earth First compound. He could see the shimmering waves of pheromones in the air, creating a near-impenetrable barrier around the facility. Taking a deep breath, Greg focused on the pheromone currents. With a thought, he created a small pocket of clean air around himself. Then he leaped into action. Greg moved through the compound like a ghost, neutralizing guards with swift, precise strikes. As he approached the main building, he encountered a group of Earth First soldiers equipped with pheromone dispersal units. Before they could react, Greg extended his influence over the pheromones they were about to release. With a twist of his will, he turned their weapons against them. The soldiers collapsed, overcome by their own chemical agents. Inside the facility, Greg fought his way through increasingly desperate resistance. His enhanced strength and speed, combined with his newfound pheromone control, made him nearly unstoppable. In the heart of the compound, Greg cornered a group of high-ranking Earth First members, including a woman he recognized as Major Evelyn Reese, Hawthorne's second-in-command. "It's over," Greg said, his voice firm as he disabled the last of their defenses. "Surrender now." Reese snarled, her hand inching towards a hidden weapon. "You think this ends here? We're just the beginning. The Wadi will never—" Greg cut her off, using his pheromone control to render her and the others unconscious. As he secured the prisoners, he couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of unease. Reese's words hinted at a larger conspiracy, one that stretched beyond Earth. In the days that followed, Greg led a series of successful raids against Earth First strongholds across the globe. With each victory, public opinion began to shift back in favor of human-Wadi cooperation. However, as the weeks wore on, Greg noticed his abilities becoming increasingly erratic. During a crucial mission to secure an Earth First communications hub, his pheromone control faltered, nearly allowing several key members to escape. Dr. Chen ran a series of tests, her face growing more concerned with each result. "Greg, your physiology is destabilizing. Without regular exposure to Wadi pheromones, particularly phase, your enhanced abilities are becoming unpredictable. We need to find a solution, fast." As Greg grappled with this news, an urgent communication came through from the Wadi homeworld. Faye's face appeared on the screen, her antenna twitching with excitement and worry. "Greg, I've made a breakthrough," she said, her words coming in a rush. "The long-term effects of pheromone exposure on human DNA, it's more significant than we thought. We could be looking at the potential for a new hybrid species. But there's more. Vexa's followers have been increasing their attacks. They're targeting our research. I don't know how long we can—" The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Greg staring at a static-filled screen. His heart raced as he considered the implications of Faye's discovery and the growing threat she faced. Before he could process this new information, alarms blared throughout the facility. General Steele burst into the room, his face grim. "We've got multiple Earth First attacks happening simultaneously across the globe," he announced. "And we've just received word of a massive assault on the Wadi homeworld. Vexa's forces are moving on the capital." Greg felt the weight of two worlds pressing down on him. He knew he had to make a choice, and fast. The fate of human-Wadi relations, and possibly the future of both species, hung in the balance. As he opened his mouth to speak, a searing pain shot through his body. His vision blurred, the room spinning around him as his unstable abilities threatened to overwhelm him. In that moment, Greg realized that his decision wouldn't just affect the larger conflict, it could determine his very survival. Survival. As the pain subsided, Greg's vision cleared, and he found himself supported by Dr. Chen and General Steele. "We need to stabilize you," Dr. Chen said, her voice urgent. "I've been working with Dr. Tanaka on an experimental procedure. It's risky, but it might be our only option." Greg nodded, his breath coming in short gasps. "Do it, whatever it takes." Within hours, Greg found himself in a state-of-the-art medical facility, surrounded by a team of human and Wadi scientists. Dr. Tanaka, a stern-faced woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, approached with a syringe filled with an iridescent liquid. "This contains a synthetic version of Faye's pheromones, combined with nanotech stabilizers," she explained. "It should help regulate your abilities, but the process won't be pleasant." As the needle pierced his skin, Greg felt a fire ignite in his veins. His body convulsed and he clenched his teeth to stifle a scream. Through the haze of pain, vivid hallucinations of Faye flickered before his eyes. He saw her in the lab on the Wadi homeworld, her antennae twitching with concentration as she worked feverishly on something he couldn't quite make out. On the Wadi planet, Faye received word of Greg's condition. Her compound eyes widened with concern as she read the transmission. Without hesitation, she dove back into her research, determined to find a solution that could help Greg from across the stars. Days passed in a blur of agony and fevered visions for Greg. When he finally regained full consciousness, Dr. Tanaka stood at his bedside, her face a mix of relief and concern. "The procedure was successful," she said, "but there were some unexpected outcomes. Your abilities have stabilized, but they're not as potent as before. It seems the synthetic pheromones can't fully replicate the effect of direct contact with Faye." Greg tested his powers, feeling the familiar tingle of pheromone manipulation, but noticing the reduced intensity. He nodded, accepting the trade-off for stability. "It'll have to do," he said, swinging his legs off the bed. "What's our status?" General Steele entered the room, his face grim. "We've formed a new task force, Operation Synergy. It's a joint human Wadi unit, and we want you to lead it, Sullivan. Your first mission is to take down a major Earth-first stronghold." Greg's eyebrows furrowed as he absorbed the information. Within hours, he found himself leading a team of enhanced human soldiers and Wadi specialists towards an abandoned military base that Earth First had claimed as their own. As they approached the compound, Greg felt a new sensation. He focused, and a wave of calm emanated from him, washing over his team and several Earth-first guards they encountered. The hostile humans lowered their weapons, confusion replacing the anger in their eyes. "New trick," Greg muttered, surprised by this development. The raid was a success, with minimal casualties on both sides thanks to Greg's newfound ability. As they secured the base, Greg uncovered a trove of intelligence that made his blood run cold. "General," he called over the comm, "we've got a problem. Hawthorne's not on Earth anymore. He's headed to the Wadi homeworld to join forces with Vexa. They're planning a coordinated attack on both planets' governments." The news set off a flurry of activity. Within hours, the United Earth government had authorized an emergency mission to the Wadi homeworld. As Greg prepared to board the interstellar vessel with Operation Synergy, a sharp pain lanced through his head. Dr. Clark, the ship's medical officer, rushed to his side. "Agent Sullivan, are you all right?" Greg shook his head, trying to clear the fog of rage that had suddenly descended. "Something's wrong. The synthetic pheromones. They're having some kind of side effect." As they journeyed through space, Greg's condition deteriorated. Mood swings rocked him, from deep depression to uncontrollable anger. Dr. Clark worked tirelessly to keep him stable, but it was clear that only Faye's presence or her research could provide a lasting solution. Halfway through their journey, a garbled transmission reached their ship. Faye's voice, distorted by static, came through. "Under attack. Vexra's forces, breached defenses, need help." Greg's heart raced as the transmission cut out. He pushed himself to his feet, fighting against the warring emotions within him. "We need to move faster," he ordered, his voice strained. "Faye and her research are our only hope of stopping this war before it starts." As their ship entered the Wadi atmosphere, The crew gasped at the chaos below. Vexra's forces had launched a full-scale assault on multiple cities and government installations. In the distance, smoke rose from the direction of Faye's research facility. Greg closed his eyes, focusing on the pheromones around him. With immense effort, he projected a wave of calm over his team, steadying their nerves for the battle ahead. "Operation Synergy," he said, his voice firm, despite the turmoil within him. "Prepare for immediate deployment. Our primary objective is to secure Faye's research facility and extract her and her team. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and watch each other's backs." As the ship began its descent towards the besieged facility, Greg gripped the railing tightly, his squeezing hard with tension. The fate of two worlds and his own future hung in the balance, all resting on the outcome of this mission. The fate of two worlds and his own future hung in the balance, all resting on the outcome of this bold strategy. As the ship plummeted through the WTI atmosphere, Greg's enhanced senses kicked into overdrive. Through the chaos of battle below, he focused intently, searching for any trace of Faye's unique pheromone signature. Suddenly, a faint but distinct pattern caught his attention. "There," he shouted, pointing to a section of the sprawling research complex. "Faye's in the northwest quadrant, sub-level 2. The pilot expertly maneuvered the ship, dodging incoming fire from Vexra's forces. With a bone-jarring thud, they landed on the facility's roof. Greg was the first one out, his body moving with a speed and grace that belied his internal struggle. "Operation Synergy, move out!" he commanded, leading the charge into the fray. The team encountered immediate resistance. Vexra's troops, a mix of radicalized Wadi and enhanced humans, swarmed towards them. Greg's fluctuating powers manifested in bursts of superhuman strength. He grabbed an oncoming attacker and hurled him into a group of advancing soldiers, scattering them like bowling pins. As they fought their way deeper into the facility, Greg's control over his abilities wavered. One moment, he was disorienting a group of enemies with a targeted pheromone burst. The next, he was barely able to deflect a blow aimed at his head. Dr. Clark's voice crackled over the comm. "Sullivan, your vitals are all over the place. You need to stabilize soon or—" Her warning was cut short as a massive explosion rocked the building. Through the smoke and debris, Greg saw a familiar face. Colonel Hawthorne leading a squad of Earth First elite. "Sullivan," Hawthorne sneered, his body pulsing with an unnatural energy. "You're looking a bit under the weather." Greg gritted his teeth, fighting back a wave of nausea. "Still good enough to take you down, Hawthorne." The two enhanced humans clashed in a blur of motion. Hawthorne's newfound abilities matched Greg blow for blow. Their fight raged through the corridors, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Meanwhile, several levels below, Faye and her assistant Zara worked frantically in a fortified lab. The sounds of battle grew closer with each passing moment. "Almost there," Faye muttered, her antennae twitching with concentration as she synthesized the stabilizing agent. "Zara, get ready to move." Just as Faye completed the formula, the lab's outer defenses fell. Zara grabbed the precious vial, leading a group of Wadi scientists in a desperate defense as Faye worked to produce more of the agent. Greg, locked in combat with Hawthorne, felt his control slipping further. His pheromone emissions began affecting allies and enemies alike, causing confusion and disorientation around him. "What's wrong, Sullivan?" Hawthorne taunted, landing a solid punch to Greg's midsection. "Can't handle the power?" Greg stumbled, his vision blurring. He lashed out wildly, his fist connecting with a support beam and sending cracks spiderwebbing through the ceiling. Suddenly, a new presence entered the fray. Vexra herself appeared, her body radiating an otherworldly energy. "You've served your purpose, Hawthorne," she said coldly, before unleashing a wave of pheromones that sent the colonel reeling. Greg found himself face to face with the Wadi extremist leader, her compound eyes gleaming with malice. She struck with incredible speed, driving Greg back. "Your kind will never understand true power," Vexra hissed, her attacks growing more intense. Greg fought back with everything he had, but his unstable condition left him vulnerable. Vexra pressed her advantage, forcing him into a corner. Just as Vexra prepared to land a finishing blow, a familiar scent cut through the chaos. Greg's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he saw Faye emerge from a nearby corridor, her body radiating an intense pheromone signature. "Greg!" Faye called out, her voice filled with concern and purpose. The moment their eyes met, Greg felt a surge of energy course through his body. His chaotic powers stabilized, his mind clearing instantly. With renewed strength, he pushed back against Vexa, forcing her to retreat. "No!" Vexa snarled, realizing the tide had turned. She fired off a final barrage of attacks before disappearing down a side passage, dragging the incapacitated Hawthorne with her. Greg and Faye reunited in the middle of the devastated corridor, their enhanced pheromones creating a bubble of calm amidst the ongoing battle. They shared a brief, intense look, volumes passing between them without a word. "We need to end this," Greg said, his voice steady for the first time in days. Faye nodded, her antennae quivering with purpose. Together. Side by side, they led the final push against the remaining extremist forces. Greg's stabilized abilities complemented Faye's enhanced pheromone production perfectly. They moved as one, overwhelming Vexa's troops with a combination of physical prowess and pheromone manipulation. As the last of the enemy forces fell or retreated, Greg and Faye found themselves in the heart of the ruined facility. The victory was bittersweet. While they had saved the research center, much of Faye's work lay in smoking ruins around them. "We did it," Faye said softly, her hand finding Greg's. Before Greg could respond, Dr. Clark's voice came urgently over the comm. "Sullivan, we've got a problem. Our sensors indicate that Vexa managed to access and download some of the research data before escaping." Greg's expression resolute as he processed this new threat. He looked at Faye, seeing his own mix of exhaustion and tenacity mirrored in her compound eyes. "What now?" he asked, knowing their fight was just getting started. Faye's antennae twitched thoughtfully. "We need to perfect the stabilizing agent, and then we need to find a way to counteract whatever Vexa's planning." As if on cue, reports began flooding in of unrest on other Wadi colonies. The conflict was spreading, potentially endangering the entire galaxy. Greg squeezed Faye's hand, his enhanced senses picking up the subtle changes in her pheromone output that indicated her worry and willpower. "Then we'd better get to work," he said, his voice low and intense. "Together." Greg's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared responsibility. Faye nodded, her antennae twitching with drive as they surveyed the aftermath of the battle. "Let's start by securing what's left of my research," Faye said, leading Greg through the debris-strewn corridors of the facility. Over the next few days, Greg and Faye worked tirelessly alongside Operation Synergy and the remaining Wadi scientists to salvage what they could from the wreckage. As they sifted through twisted metal and shattered glass, a grim reality set in. "This is worse than we thought," Faye muttered, her compound eyes scanning a damaged data terminal. "Vexa didn't just take bits and pieces. She got her hands on our latest stabilization techniques and human-Wadi interaction data." Greg's eyebrows furrowed. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough to give her a significant advantage," Faye replied, her antennae drooping slightly. "We need to move fast if we want to stay ahead of her." As they worked, Greg noticed a change in himself. The chaos that had plagued his system began to subside, replaced by a newfound clarity and control. His pheromone manipulation abilities sharpened, becoming more precise and potent with each passing hour. During a rare moment of respite, Greg demonstrated his enhanced abilities to Dr. Clark and the rest of the medical team. With a subtle shift in his stance, he projected a targeted burst of calming pheromones that affected only a specific group of individuals in the room. Dr. Clark's eyes widened. "Remarkable. The prolonged exposure to Faye's enhanced pheromones seems to have stabilized your condition and amplified your abilities." Before they could discuss further, a priority transmission came through. General Steele's holographic image flickered to life in the makeshift command center. "Agent Sullivan, Dr. Neelion," the general addressed them, his face grave. "In light of recent events, the United Earth government and Wadi leadership have authorized an expansion of Operation Synergy's mandate. Your mission now is to track down Vexa and neutralize her growing extremist network across multiple planets." Greg straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "Understood, sir. What's our first move?" We've detected increased unrest on several Wadi colonies, Steele continued. We believe this is directly linked to Vexra's activities. Your team will investigate these disturbances and gather intelligence on her whereabouts. As the briefing concluded, Greg turned to Faye. Looks like we're taking this show on the road. Their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar face. Dr. Elena Reeves strode into the room, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. Greg, Faye, she greeted them, her voice tight. I've made some discoveries about the long-term effects of human-Wadi pheromone interactions. We need to talk. The news Dr. Reeves shared sent ripples of unease through the team. The potential for unforeseen genetic mutations in future generations raised complex questions about the nature of human-Wadi relations. Greg and Faye exchanged a look, both acutely aware of the personal implications. Their growing closeness now carried an added weight of uncertainty. As the expanded Operation Synergy prepared for their first off-world mission, tensions began to simmer beneath the surface. Human team members whispered concerns about the increasing reliance on Wadi technology and Greg's enhanced abilities. Greg overheard two soldiers talking in low voices as they loaded equipment onto the transport ship. I'm telling you, it's not natural, one said. How do we know these Wadi pheromones aren't messing with our heads? Greg approached them, his expression neutral. I understand your concerns, he said, carefully modulating his pheromone output to project a sense of calm and openness. But we're all in this together, human and Wadi alike. The soldiers visibly relaxed, nodding in agreement. As Greg walked away, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease about the ethical implications of his actions. Meanwhile, Faye threw herself into her research, working tirelessly to develop a self-sustaining pheromone generation system for humans. Greg found her hunched over a microscope late one night, her antennae twitching with fatigue. Faye, he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. You need to rest. She looked up at him, her compound eyes reflecting the dim lab lights. I can't, Greg. Not until I figure this out. If I can create a system that eliminates your dependence on external pheromones, it could change everything. Greg gently pulled her away from the workstation. And you will, but not if you burn yourself out first. As the launch date for their mission to the mining colony approached, Greg and Faye found a moment of privacy amidst the chaos. They stood on a balcony overlooking the Wadi capital, the alien landscape stretching out before them. Whatever happens out there, Greg said, taking Faye's hand in his, whatever these changes mean for us, I'm with you. Faye's antennae brushed against Greg's cheek in a gesture of affection. And I'm with you. We'll face it together. The moment was interrupted by the sound of engines roaring to life. Operation Synergy's transport vessels were preparing for takeoff. Greg and Faye made their way to the launch pad, where the Joint Human-Wadi Task Force awaited their leaders. As they boarded the lead ship, Greg felt a surge of anticipation. The mission ahead would be dangerous, the stakes higher than ever before. As the ships lifted off, carrying Operation Synergy towards their confrontation with Vexa, Greg looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, answers awaited them. Answers that could shape the future of human-Wadi relations for generations to come. The engines hummed, pushing them faster towards their destination. Greg settled into his seat, Faye by his side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The transport vessels shuddered as they pierced through the toxic atmosphere of the remote Wadi mining colony. Greg tightened his grip on the handrail, his enhanced senses picking up the subtle changes in air pressure and temperature even through the ship's hull. Beside him, Faye's antennae twitched with anticipation. We're entering the lower stratosphere, she announced, her compound eyes fixed on the external sensors. The corrosive gases are intensifying. All right, team, Greg called out, addressing the assembled members of Operation Synergy. Final equipment check. We're about to hit the surface. As the ships touched down on the desolate landscape, Greg and Faye led the first reconnaissance team out onto the planet's surface. The specialized protective suits hissed as they sealed, creating a barrier against the hostile environment. Greg's enhanced physiology provided an extra layer of protection, allowing him to detect minute changes in the atmosphere that even the suit's sensors missed. He raised a hand, signaling the team to halt as they approached the abandoned mining facilities. There's something off about this place, he muttered, his eyes scanning the twisted metal structures that loomed before them. Faye, are you picking up anything? Faye's antennae quivered as she focused her senses. Trace amounts of pheromones, she confirmed. Definitely Wadi in origin, but altered somehow. Greg nodded grimly. Vexra's been here. The team moved cautiously through the eerily silent facility, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Suddenly, Greg's enhanced hearing picked up a faint sound coming from beneath their feet. Everyone, freeze, he whispered, dropping to one knee and pressing his hand against the metal floor. There's a network of tunnels below us. With practiced efficiency, the team located a concealed entrance leading into the underground complex. As they descended into the darkness, Greg's senses went into overdrive, mapping out their surroundings and searching for potential threats. The tunnel system was a maze of narrow passages and cavernous chambers, each turn bringing new challenges. Greg's pheromone manipulation abilities proved invaluable as they encountered a series of biological traps designed to incapacitate intruders. Hold up, Greg said, raising his hand as they approached a particularly narrow section of the tunnel. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the subtle pheromone traces in the air. With a carefully controlled burst of his own pheromones, he neutralized the trap's trigger mechanism. Clear, he announced, gesturing for the team to move forward. As they pressed deeper into the complex, the signs of recent activity became more apparent. Faye's eyes widened as they entered a massive underground laboratory filled with advanced equipment. This is it, she breathed, her voice a mix of awe and horror. They're using my research data. Look at these setups. They're trying to create a new strain of pheromones that could affect both humans and Wadi. Greg's teeth clenched as he surveyed the lab. We need to shut this down and gather what intel we can. Team Alpha, start planting charges on the key systems. Beta Team, with me, we're going to access their central database. As the team spread out to complete their tasks, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts proved correct when a group of Vexra's enhanced soldiers suddenly emerged from hidden alcoves, their movements unnaturally fluid and coordinated. Ambush, Greg shouted, dodging a powerful blow from one of the attackers. He engaged the soldier, quickly realizing that these troops possessed abilities similar to his own. The fight became a brutal dance of enhanced reflexes and pheromone manipulation, with both sides struggling to gain the upper hand. In the chaos of the battle, Faye found herself separated from the main group. Two of Vexra's soldiers cornered her near a bank of computer terminals. Panic surged through her as she realized she was outmatched in physical combat. In a moment of desperation, Faye tapped into a part of herself she had never fully explored. She released a concentrated burst of her own enhanced pheromones, targeting her attackers with pinpoint precision. The effect was immediate. Both soldiers staggered, their movements becoming uncoordinated and sluggish. Taking advantage of their disorientation, Faye slipped past them and rejoined the main group. The implications of what she had just done left her shaken, but there was no time to dwell on it as the battle raged on. Greg, noticing Faye's distress even amidst the chaos, fought his way to her side. Are you all right? He asked, his voice tight with concern. Before Faye could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the lab. Colonel Hawthorne, his body now bulging with unnaturally enhanced musculature, strode confidently towards them. Sullivan, Hawthorne called out, his voice dripping with malice. I've been waiting for this rematch. Your little pheromone tricks won't work on me this time. Greg's eyes narrowed as he assessed his opponent. Faye, take the team and push deeper into the facility. Find Vexra and whatever she's planning. I'll handle Hawthorne. As Faye led the Operation Synergy team further into the complex, Greg squared off against his enhanced nemesis. The two circled each other, the air thick with tension and competing pheromones. Hawthorne struck first, his enhanced speed catching Greg off guard. Greg barely managed to deflect the blow, feeling the force of it reverberate through his body. He countered with a flurry of his own attacks, but Hawthorne seemed to anticipate each move. As their battle intensified, causing significant damage to the surrounding lab equipment, Greg realized he would need to push his abilities to their limit to overcome Hawthorne's new enhancements. Meanwhile, Faye and the team discovered a massive chamber housing a device that sent chills down her spine. The machine before them was unmistakably a weaponized version of the technology used in Zalara's attack on the Wadi homeworld, but on a scale she had never imagined possible. "No," Faye whispered, her antennae drooping in horror. "This could affect entire star systems." Her analysis was interrupted by a cold, familiar voice. "Impressive, isn't it, Dr. Nelion?" Vexa emerged from behind the massive device, her compound eyes gleaming with triumph. "This is the culmination of our work, the key to a new era for both our species." Faye stood her ground, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "This isn't progress, Vexa. It's madness." "Is it?" Vexa countered, gesturing at the device. "With this, we can create a new, superior hybrid species. No more conflict between humans and Wadi. We'll be one unified race, more powerful than either could have imagined." She extended a hand towards Faye. "Join me. Together, we can shape the future of two species." Faye's antennae quivered with almost unchecked anger. "Never!" she spat, her hand reaching for the sabotage device concealed in her suit. Vexra's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos. Vexra's remaining forces poured in from hidden entrances, engaging the Operation Synergy team in a fierce firefight. Faye ducked behind a console, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan to disable the Pheromone dispersal device. The battle raged across multiple fronts. Greg and Hawthorne's titanic struggle had moved through several chambers, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Faye led her team in a desperate fight against Vexra's forces, all while trying to sabotage the Doomsday device. As the conflict intensified, the unstable nature of the experimental pheromones began to take its toll. Greg found his abilities fluctuating wildly, one moment possessing incredible strength, the next struggling to maintain his balance. Faye experienced similar instability, her enhanced senses alternating between hyper-awareness and complete disorientation. Vexra's forces were not immune to the chaos. Many of her enhanced soldiers began to lose control, their movements becoming erratic and unpredictable. The entire underground complex devolved into a nightmarish battleground, with the fate of multiple species hanging in the balance. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the facility. Cracks began to appear in the walls and ceiling, debris raining down on friend and foe alike. The unstable pheromones and the damage from the ongoing battles had compromised the structural integrity of the entire tunnel system. Alarms blared as the complex automated systems detected the imminent collapse. Greg, having momentarily gained the upper hand against Hawthorne, looked up in alarm as a massive support beam groaned ominously above them. "Faye," he shouted over the comlink, "we need to get out of here. This whole place is coming down." Faye's voice came back, strained and filled with static. "We can't leave yet. If this device isn't destroyed, everything we've fought for will be for nothing." As the facility continued to crumble around them, Greg, Faye, and the Operation Synergy team faced an impossible choice. With time running out, they would have to find a way to complete their mission, defeat their enemies, and escape the collapsing tunnels, all while battling the unpredictable effects of the experimental pheromones coursing through their systems. The race against time had begun, with the lives of everyone in the facility, and potentially billions more across the galaxy, hanging in the balance. The facility shuddered violently, chunks of debris raining down from the ceiling. Greg's enhanced senses screamed danger as he dodged a falling support beam, narrowly avoiding being crushed. "Faye," he shouted into his comm, struggling to be heard over the cacophony of alarms and crumbling infrastructure. "We're out of time." Faye's voice crackled through the static, her usual calm replaced by urgency. "Almost there, Greg. Just a few more seconds." Greg's muscles burned as he pushed himself harder, fighting against the waves of disorientation caused by the unstable pheromones saturating the air. He rounded a corner to see Faye and her team frantically working on the massive dispersal device. Suddenly, a surge of strength coursed through Greg's body. His vision sharpened, the world around him seeming to slow down. Without hesitation, he launched himself at Colonel Hawthorne, who had been advancing on Faye's position. The two enhanced humans collided with bone-jarring force. Greg's newfound strength caught Hawthorne off guard, allowing him to drive the colonel back against a crumbling wall. Pinning Hawthorne with one arm, Greg focused his mind, channeling his pheromone manipulation abilities. "This ends now, Hawthorne," Greg growled, releasing a concentrated burst of calming pheromones directly into the colonel's face. Hawthorne's eyes widened in shock, his body going rigid as the pheromones breached his defenses. The fight drained from him, his enhanced muscles relaxing as he slumped against the wall. With Hawthorne neutralized, Greg turned his attention back to Faye and the dispersal device. He arrived just as Vexa unleashed a new type of pheromone weapon, filling the air with a sickly sweet scent. Several Operation Synergy team members staggered, their eyes glazing over. Greg watched in horror as they turned on each other, the pheromones twisting their perceptions. Faye, however, stood firm. Her antennae quivered as she concentrated, releasing her own pheromones to counter Vexa's attack. A bubble of clarity formed around her, pushing back the disorienting effects. Greg felt his mind clear as he entered Faye's protective field. "Nice work," he said, joining her at the device's control panel. "What do you need me to do?" Faye's compound eyes flickered with grit. "Help me override the final security protocols. We need to shut this thing down before—" A deafening explosion rocked the chamber, cutting off Faye's words. Vexa's voice echoed through the facility's communication system. "If I can't have it, no one will. This entire complex will be your tomb." Greg and Faye shared a look of understanding. Their hands flew over the controls, their abilities amplifying each other's efforts. As the facility crumbled around them, they pushed their enhanced physiologies to the limit. "Got it!" Faye exclaimed as the dispersal device powered down. "Initiating full system shutdown." Greg nodded, already turning to address the team. "Everyone, move out! Head for the surface, now!" They raced through the collapsing tunnels, Greg and Faye using their enhanced abilities to clear paths and guide their comrades. The air grew thicker with toxic gases as the facility's environmental systems failed. A massive tremor shook the complex, causing a cave-in that separated Greg and Faye from the rest of the team. Trapped in a rapidly shrinking pocket of the tunnel system, they found themselves gasping for breath as their suit filters struggled against the increasingly toxic atmosphere. Greg felt a burning sensation in his lungs, but to his surprise, it began to subside. He took a cautious breath, then another. "Faye," he said, his voice filled with wonder. I think we can breathe this air." Faye's antennae twitched as she tested the atmosphere. "You're right. Our bodies must be adapting to the pheromones and the toxic environment. But how?" There was no time to ponder the implications. They removed their bulky suits, allowing them to squeeze through a narrow fissure in the rock. As they navigated the gas-filled tunnels, they encountered pockets of trapped colonists, miners who had been forced into hiding by Vexa's forces. Working in tandem, Greg and Faye used their newfound abilities to create safe passages through the toxic environment. Greg's pheromone manipulation cleared paths of noxious gases, while Faye's enhanced senses guided them through the maze-like tunnels. After what felt like hours of grueling effort, they emerged onto the planet's surface, leading a group of haggard but grateful survivors. The toxic atmosphere stung their eyes and skin, but their adapted bodies held out. To their surprise, a fleet of Wadi ships hovered in the sky, their sleek forms a stark contrast to the desolate landscape. Operation Synergy team members rushed to meet them, relief evident on their faces. As medical teams swarmed around them, treating injuries and processing the rescued colonists, Greg and Faye learned that Vexa had managed to escape in the chaos. However, they had captured several key members of her organization, including the still-dazed Colonel Hawthorne. Dr. Elena Reeves approached, her eyes widening as she took in Greg and Faye's appearance. "Your physiologies, they're changing at an unprecedented rate. We need to get you both to the research facility immediately." As they boarded the transport ship bound for the Wadi homeworld, Greg and Faye found a moment alone. The intensity of their shared experience hung between them, unspoken but palpable. Faye's antennae brushed against Greg's arm, sending a shiver through both of them. "Greg," she began, her voice soft, "what we just went through—" Greg nodded, taking her hand in his. "I know. Whatever comes next, whatever these changes mean for us, we'll face it together. As the ship lifted off, carrying them towards an uncertain future, Greg and Faye stood side by side, their entwined hands a symbol of the deepening bond between them, and perhaps of the future of human-Wadi relations itself. As the ship docked at the main research facility on the Wadi homeworld, Greg and Faye exchanged a nervous glance. Their bodies still tingled with the strange new sensations they had experienced on the toxic planet, and the implications of their evolving physiology greatly troubled on their minds. Dr. Elena Reeves met them at the airlock, her face a mixture of concern and scientific curiosity. "We need to get you both to the medical bay immediately," she said, ushering them down a pristine white corridor. The next few days passed in a blur of tests, scans, and examinations. Greg and Faye found themselves poked, prodded, and analyzed by a team of human and Wadi scientists, all eager to understand the remarkable changes occurring within their bodies. On the third day, Dr. Reeves called them into her office, her eyes bright with excitement. "The results are extraordinary," she began, pulling up a holographic display of their DNA. "Your genetic structures have undergone significant alterations. You've developed the ability to produce and process a wide range of pheromones, far beyond what we thought possible for either humans or Wadi." Greg leaned forward, studying the complex patterns swirling before him. "What does this mean for us, Doctor?" Before Dr. Reeves could answer, Faye suddenly gasped, her antennae quivering. Greg felt it too, a warm, tingling sensation spreading through his body. The air between them seemed to shimmer with an invisible energy. Dr. Reeves's eyes widened as she checked her instruments. "Fascinating. Your bodies are producing complementary pheromones. When combined, they're creating a potent synergistic effect." The sensation intensified, and Greg felt a surge of strength coursing through his muscles. Beside him, Faye's compound eyes gleamed with an otherworldly awareness. "We need to study this further," Dr. Reeves declared, already typing furiously on her datapad. "I'm setting up a series of experiments to explore the full extent of your evolving abilities." Over the next few weeks, Greg and Faye underwent rigorous testing. In one trial, Greg easily lifted weights that would have crushed an ordinary human, his muscles bulging with newfound power. In another, Faye demonstrated an uncanny ability to influence the emotional states of a group of volunteers, calming an agitated crowd with a subtle release of pheromones. As news of their unique abilities spread, the research facility became a hive of activity. Human and Wadi diplomats arrived, eager to discuss the implications of this development. Greg overheard heated arguments about the potential military applications of their powers and the impact on interspecies relations. One afternoon, as Greg and Faye were taking a much-needed break in the facility's arboretum, a familiar face appeared. General Marcus Steele strode towards them, his expression stern. "Captain Reeves, Dr. Nellion," he greeted them formally. "I've come to discuss your transfer back to Earth for further study." Faye's antennae twitched in alarm. "Transfer? But our work here isn't finished." The general's eyes narrowed. "This is no longer just a scientific matter. The potential military applications of your abilities cannot be ignored." Before Greg could respond, an urgent alert sounded throughout the facility. Dr. Reeves's voice came over the intercom, tight with tension. "All senior personnel report to the command center immediately. We have a situation." In the command center, they found a flurry of activity. Holographic displays showed maps of the outer Wadi colonies, red warning indicators flashing ominously. "We've detected unusual activity on several colonies," a Wadi intelligence officer reported. "Our sources suggest that Vexa has established a new base of operations. She's recruiting both human and Wadi extremists to her cause." Greg felt a chill run down his spine. "She's building an army of enhanced soldiers," he realized aloud. General Steele's face hardened. "This changes everything. We need to act fast." Over the next few hours, a plan took shape. A new elite task force would be formed, combining the best of human and Wadi special operations. Its mission, to track down Vexa and neutralize her operations across multiple star systems. "We're calling it Project Chimera," Dr. Reeves announced, "and we want you to lead it." Greg and Faye shared a look of drive. This was their chance to use their new abilities for a greater purpose. As they began assembling their team, a new complication arose. Zara, Faye's former colleague, arrived as the Wadi liaison to Project Chimera. Her presence added an undercurrent of tension to the group dynamics, especially when Greg caught her admiring glances in his direction. The pressure mounted as they prepared for their first mission. During a high-intensity training exercise designed to push their limits, Greg and Faye accidentally triggered a massive pheromone surge. The entire research facility was affected, with humans and Wadi alike experiencing a temporary loss of control, overwhelmed by heightened emotions and physical responses. As alarms blared and chaos reigned, Greg and Faye struggled to contain their powers. Dr. Reeves, her face pale with concern, managed to activate an emergency ventilation system, dispersing the pheromones. In the aftermath, Greg and Faye stood before a stern-faced review board. Dr. Reeves spoke urgently. "We need to find a way to stabilize your pheromone production. Without proper control, your abilities could continue to grow exponentially, posing a threat to yourselves and others." The incident added a new layer of complexity to their mission. Not only did they have to stop Vexa, but they also had to master their evolving powers before they became too unstable. As Greg and Faye suited up for their first field operation, tension filled the air. A deep cover agent had reported sighting Vexa on a remote mining outpost in a neighboring star system. This was their chance to strike. However, as they prepared to board their stealth shuttle, Greg felt a familiar tingling sensation. Beside him, Faye's antennae began to quiver uncontrollably. Their eyes met, filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. A sudden, intense pheromone spike surged through their bodies, leaving them gasping for breath. As the rest of Project Chimera looked on in concern, Greg and Faye realized the true challenge that lay ahead. Could they control their powers long enough to complete the mission? The fate of human-Wadi relations, and perhaps the galaxy itself, now rested on their shoulders. Shoulders tensed. The sudden intensity of their pheromone production threatened to overwhelm them both, potentially compromising the entire mission before it even began. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, observing the situation from a nearby monitoring station, sprang into action. Her fingers flew across a holographic interface as she rapidly formulated a solution. Within moments, she rushed towards Greg and Faye, a pair of auto-injectors in her hands. "This should help stabilize your condition," she explained, pressing the devices against their necks. A cool sensation spread through their bodies as the suppressant took effect, gradually dampening the pheromone surge. Greg took a deep breath, feeling his body return to a manageable state. "Thank you, Doctor. That was too close." Faye's antennae relaxed as she regained control. "How long will this suppressant last?" "It should give you enough time to complete the initial phase of the operation," Dr. Reeves replied, "but it's only temporary. You'll need to be cautious." With the crisis averted, Project Chimera boarded their advanced stealth ship. The sleek vessel hummed to life, its adaptive camouflage system rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. As they approached the mining outpost, the team gathered for a final briefing. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing detailed scans of the facility. "Our intel suggests Vexa is operating out of the central complex," Greg explained, highlighting a cluster of buildings. "Our primary objective is to locate and neutralize her." Faye stepped forward, her compound eyes reflecting the holograms. "We should expect heavy resistance. Vexa's forces are likely to be enhanced, possibly with abilities similar to ours." The ship's pilot announced their approach to the mining outpost. As they drew closer, an unexpected obstacle came into view. A shimmering, translucent dome encapsulating the entire facility. "That's not a standard energy shield," Zara observed, her Wadi sensory organs twitching. "It's pheromone-based?" Greg focused his enhanced senses on the barrier, detecting subtle variations in its composition. "There's a weak point," he announced, pointing to a section of the dome. "The pheromone concentration is lower there." Faye moved to stand beside him, her own abilities syncing with his. Together they began to manipulate their pheromone output, creating a complex cocktail of chemicals designed to interact with the force field. The air around them grew thick with invisible particles as Greg and Faye worked in tandem. Sweat beaded on their foreheads, the effort of fine-tuning their abilities, pushing them to their limits. Suddenly, a small opening appeared in the dome. "Now!" Greg shouted. The pilot expertly maneuvered the ship through the gap, which sealed behind them almost instantly. They had breached Vexra's defenses undetected. As Project Chimera disembarked, they found themselves in a cavernous hangar filled with strange machinery. Assembly lines stretched into the distance, producing what appeared to be specialized environmental suits. "These aren't just for protection," Faye whispered, examining a nearby unit. "They're designed to enhance and channel pheromone production." Greg nodded grimly. "Vexra's creating an army of enhanced soldiers." They moved deeper into the facility, encountering surprisingly little resistance. As they rounded a corner, they found out why. Dozens of human and Wadi workers lay unconscious on the floor, overcome by a potent pheromone mixture. "She's rushing the enhancement process," Zara observed, checking a nearby console. "These poor souls couldn't handle the sudden changes." A distant alarm began to blare, and the team tensed for combat. But as a group of Vexra's enhanced soldiers rounded the corner, something unexpected happened. The enemy troops stumbled, their movements becoming erratic. Greg felt a familiar tingling sensation and realized with a start that his suppressant was wearing off. Beside him, Faye's antennae quivered uncontrollably. "Our pheromones," she gasped. "They're affecting Vexra's soldiers." The unintended pheromone release from Greg and Faye had thrown the enemy into disarray. Project Chimera seized the advantage, quickly subduing the confused troops. As they secured the area, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Holographic projectors flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of Vexra herself. "So the human and Wadi governments think they can stop me with their little science experiments?" she sneered, her eyes locking onto Greg and Faye. "You have no idea what true power is." The projection vanished, replaced by a facility-wide alert. Heavily armored troops began pouring into the corridors, their movements precise and unaffected by the lingering pheromones. Elite guards, Greg realized. They must have some kind of immunity to our abilities. Project Chimera found themselves in a fierce firefight, forced to rely on their combat training rather than their enhanced abilities. As they fought their way through the facility, Greg noticed a sealed door, different from the others. Using his enhanced strength, he wrenched the door open, revealing a hidden laboratory. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a human or Wadi subject in various stages of pheromone enhancement. Many showed signs of severe physiological stress, their bodies warped by the unstable process. "We need to shut this down," Greg growled, moving to the central control console. As he worked to free the captives, the rest of Project Chimera held off waves of Vexra's forces. The battle raged through the corridors of the facility, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Faye, separated from the main group during the chaos, found herself in a richly appointed chamber, Vexra's private quarters. Quickly, she began searching for intel, her enhanced senses allowing her to process information at an incredible rate. A holographic display caught her attention, showing a planet-wide dispersal system. Faye's eyes widened as she realized the true scope of Vexra's plan. "This is Dr. Neeleon to command," she transmitted urgently. "Vexra intends to release a pheromone cloud across the entire planet. If successful, it could bring both humans and Wadi under her control. We need to stop her now." As Faye's message reached the team, Greg and the others redoubled their efforts. They fought their way toward the central control room, their bodies pushed to the limit. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared amidst the chaos. Colonel Hawthorne, looking haggard but determined. "Captain Reeves," he called out to Greg, "I've been working undercover, gathering intel on Vexra's operations. I can help you reach the control room." With Hawthorne's inside knowledge, Project Chimera gained a strategic advantage. They pressed forward, closing in on their target. As they approached the control room, Greg and Faye's suppressants finally wore off completely. Their pheromone production skyrocketed, creating a localized field of influence that began to affect the entire facility. Alarms blared as systems malfunctioned. Non-enhanced personnel collapsed. overwhelmed by the potent chemical cocktail saturating the air. Greg and Faye locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Together, they strode towards the control room doors, their combined pheromone output creating a visible distortion in the air around them. The doors slid open, revealing Vexa standing before a massive control panel. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of Greg and Faye, their bodies radiating with pheromone energy. "You're too late," Vexa snarled, her finger hovering over a glowing red button. "One press, and my ultimate plan begins. Are you prepared for the consequences of trying to stop me?" Greg and Faye stepped forward, their enhanced physiologies working in perfect harmony. The air crackled with potential as three of the most powerful pheromone-enhanced beings in the galaxy faced off, the fate of countless lives hanging in the balance. Balance. Greg and Faye stood their ground, their bodies radiating with an intense pheromone aura that pulsed in sync with their heightened emotions. Vexra's finger hovered over the button, her eyes darting between the two enhanced agents and the control panel. In that split second of hesitation, Greg and Faye acted. They unleashed a concentrated burst of pheromones, their combined output overwhelming Vexra's defenses. The rogue scientist staggered back, her eyes wide with shock as her own enhanced physiology struggled to counteract the potent chemical assault. Taking advantage of Vexra's momentary disorientation, Greg lunged forward, tackling her away from the control panel. Faye swiftly moved to the console, her fingers flying over the holographic interface as she initiated a system-wide shutdown. Alarms blared throughout the facility as Vexra's plan unraveled. The rest of Project Chimera, led by Colonel Hawthorne, stormed into the control room, securing the area and apprehending Vexra's remaining forces. As the dust settled, Greg and Faye found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Medical teams rushed in to assess the condition of the enhanced subjects, while tech specialists worked to decrypt Vexra's databases. Dr. Elena Reeves approached Greg and Faye, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Excellent work, you two. But we need to get you back to base immediately. Your pheromone levels are off the charts." The journey back to the Wadi homeworld was tense. Greg and Faye's bodies continued to produce pheromones at an alarming rate, requiring constant monitoring and periodic suppressant injections to prevent another uncontrolled surge. Upon their arrival, they were immediately whisked away to a specially prepared medical facility. A team of human and Wadi scientists, led by Dr. Reeves, worked around the clock to stabilize their condition. Days turned into weeks as Greg and Faye underwent a battery of tests and treatments. Their bodies, pushed to the limit by the intense pheromone production, showed signs of severe strain. Dr. Reeves's team struggled to find a long-term solution to regulate their enhanced abilities. In a private meeting with Project Chimera's leadership, Dr. Reeves delivered her findings. "Captain Reeves and Dr. Nellion's pheromone production has reached a critical point," she explained, gesturing to a holographic display of their cellular structure. "If we can't find a way to stabilize them soon, the long-term health consequences could be severe." The Joint Human-Wadi Command deliberated for hours before reaching a difficult decision. Greg and Faye were to be temporarily suspended from active field duty and placed in a specially designed containment facility. When Greg and Faye were informed of the decision, their reactions were a mix of frustration and understanding. "How long will we be in there?" Greg asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Dr. Reeves shook her head. "I can't give you an exact time frame. We need to monitor your condition closely and develop a treatment plan. It could be weeks, possibly months." Faye's antennae drooped visibly. "Will we be separated?" "I'm afraid so," Dr. Reeves replied softly. "Your pheromone interaction is too unstable. We need to isolate you to get accurate baseline readings." The following day, Greg and Faye were escorted to the containment facility. The sterile, high-tech environment was a far cry from the close quarters they had shared during their missions. As the doors sealed behind them, the physical and emotional toll of their separation became immediately apparent. Greg paced his room restlessly, his body feeling increasingly out of sync without Faye's pheromones to balance his own. Across the facility, Faye curled up on her bed, her antennae twitching erratically as she struggled to adjust to the absence of Greg's chemical signals. Days passed, and the strain on both of them grew. Their bodies, accustomed to the constant pheromone exchange, began to show signs of withdrawal. Greg experienced intense headaches and mood swings, while Faye's exoskeleton became dull and brittle. Dr. Reeves and her team worked tirelessly, analyzing data and running simulations to find a solution. They experimented with synthetic pheromone mixtures, attempting to replicate the balance that Greg and Faye had naturally achieved. Meanwhile, Colonel Hawthorne, now serving as an advisor to Project Chimera, provided crucial intelligence about Vexa's network. In a secure briefing room, he revealed the existence of a hidden stronghold on a distant Wadi colony world. Our sources indicate that Vexa has set up a new research facility, Hawthorne explained, pointing to a holographic map. She's reportedly developing a new strain of pheromones capable of affecting entire planetary populations. The news sent shockwaves through the Joint Command. Without Greg and Faye's unique abilities, neutralizing this threat would be a monumental challenge. As preparations for a large-scale operation began, an unexpected complication arose. Several members of Project Chimera began exhibiting enhanced abilities similar to Greg's, though to a lesser degree. Dr. Reeves called an emergency meeting to address this development. It appears that prolonged exposure to Greg and Faye's pheromones has triggered latent genetic potential in both humans and Wadi, she explained, her voice infused with concern. We're only beginning to understand the long-term implications of this discovery. The situation grew more complex by the day. As Zara led an advanced team to gather intelligence on Vexa's stronghold, Greg and Faye's condition in the containment facility continued to deteriorate. Dr. Reeves spent countless hours poring over data, searching for a breakthrough. Her eureka moment came in the middle of the night, jolting her awake with a risky but potentially game-changing idea. The next morning, she presented her proposal to the Joint Command. I believe we can synchronize Greg and Faye's pheromone production, she explained, her eyes bright with cautious optimism. By exposing them to a carefully calibrated mix of synthesized pheromones, we might be able to achieve a stable equilibrium. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, a Wadi commander spoke up. What are the risks? Dr. Reeves took a deep breath. Significant. The procedure could result in permanent physiological changes. In the worst-case scenario, it could accelerate the degradation of their systems. As the command debated the merits and risks of the procedure, news arrived from Zara's advance team. They had successfully infiltrated Vexa's stronghold, but encountered formidable pheromone-based defenses. Without Greg and Faye's unique abilities, a direct assault seemed doomed to fail. The Joint Command found themselves at a crossroads. Proceed with the risky operation to stabilize Greg and Faye, potentially compromising their health, but gaining a tactical advantage, or continue with the planned assault on Vexa's stronghold without their enhanced capabilities. When Greg and Faye were informed of the situation, their response was immediate and unified. Despite the risks, they volunteered to undergo the synchronization procedure. As preparations for the procedure began, alarms blared throughout the facility. Vexa had launched a surprise attack on several key Wadi colonies, deploying a new type of pheromone weapon that caused widespread chaos and disorientation. The pressure on Dr. Reeves and her team intensified. They worked feverishly to finalize the synchronization process as reports of Vexa's attack flooded in. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. Greg and Faye were led into the synchronization chamber, their bodies connected to an array of advanced medical equipment. They exchanged a long look, silently communicating their trust and tenacity. Dr. Reeves initiated the procedure, her hands steady as she activated the pheromone delivery system. The chamber filled with a shimmering mist as the synthesized mixture enveloped Greg and Faye. Their bodies began to glow with an otherworldly energy, pulsing in unison as the pheromones took effect. Greg gritted his teeth against the intense sensations coursing through him, while Faye's antennae vibrated at an impossible frequency. The medical team watched in awe as Greg and Faye's vital signs fluctuated wildly, then gradually began to stabilize. The glow surrounding their bodies intensified, becoming almost blinding. As the procedure reached its climax, a sudden power surge rocked the facility. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as if the entire system might fail. Dr. Reeves sprang into action, her fingers flying over the emergency controls. She rerouted power, stabilizing the system just as Greg and Faye's vital signs began to align perfectly. The glow surrounding them pulsed one final time before slowly fading. As the mist cleared, Greg and Faye lay motionless on their respective platforms, their bodies still connected to the medical equipment. Dr. Reeves held her breath as she approached the chamber, uncertain of what the outcome would be. As she peered through the observation window, Greg's eyes fluttered open, meeting her gaze with a clarity she hadn't seen in weeks. Beside him, Faye stirred, her antennae gently swaying as she regained consciousness. The two enhanced agents looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. As the medical team rushed to assess their condition, Dr. Reeves allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. The procedure appeared to have been successful, but the true test would come in the hours and days ahead. With Vexra's attacks intensifying and the fate of both human and Wadi worlds hanging in the balance, the clock was ticking. Greg and Faye's newly stabilized abilities might be the key to turning the tide of the conflict, but only if their bodies could withstand the strain of what lay ahead. As the medical team rushed to stabilize Greg and Faye, alarms blared throughout the facility, signaling the start of the synchronization procedure. Dr. Reeves took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the monitors as she initiated the process. The chamber housing Greg and Faye filled with a shimmering mist, the synthesized pheromone mixture enveloping their bodies. Almost immediately, their skin began to emit a soft, pulsating glow. Pheromone levels rising, a technician reported, his voice tense. Vitals are fluctuating, but within expected parameters. Dr. Reeves nodded, her fingers dancing across the control panel as she made minute adjustments to the mixture. The glow surrounding Greg and Faye intensified, their bodies arching slightly as the pheromones coursed through their systems. Suddenly, a surge of energy rippled through the facility. The lights flickered, and the containment field around the chamber wavered. "Power fluctuation!" another technician shouted. "The containment field is—" Before she could finish, a concentrated burst of pheromones escaped the chamber, washing over the nearby staff. Dr. Reeves felt a wave of dizziness, followed by a rush of heightened awareness. Around her, other team members gasped, their movements becoming quicker, more precise. "Maintain focus," Dr. Reeves ordered, fighting through the disorientation. "We need to stabilize the field." As the team worked to contain the breach, Greg and Faye's bodies continued to react to the procedure. Their individual pheromone signatures began to merge, creating a new, more potent compound. Dr. Reeves watched in fascination as the readings on her screen shifted, indicating the formation of a previously unseen chemical structure. "This is incredible," she murmured, studying the data. "The new compound appears to have stabilizing properties. It could be the key to counteracting Vexra's enhanced soldiers." Outside the lab, chaos erupted as reports flooded in from Wadi colonies under attack. Colonel Hawthorne's voice crackled over the intercom, urgency evident in his tone. "Dr. Reeves, we need a status update. Vexra's forces are using a new pheromone weapon. Multiple worlds are requesting immediate assistance." Dr. Reeves glanced at the synchronization chamber, where Greg and Faye's combined pheromone output had reached unprecedented levels. The facility's systems strained to contain the energy, causing minor tremors in the surrounding area. "We're nearing completion, Colonel," she responded, her voice tight with concern. "But the energy output is becoming unstable. I may need to terminate the procedure early." As if in response to her words, a more violent tremor shook the facility. Alarms blared, warning of imminent system failure. "Shut it down," Dr. Reeves shouted, her hand slamming down on the emergency override. The chamber hissed open, releasing a cloud of iridescent mist. As it cleared, Greg and Faye were revealed, their appearances subtly altered. Their skin shimmered with a faint, pearlescent quality, and their eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. Medical teams rushed forward, running initial tests as Greg and Faye regained consciousness. Dr. Reeves approached cautiously, her scanner humming as she assessed their condition. "How do you feel?" she asked, studying the readouts with a mix of concern and excitement. Greg flexed his hand, his movements almost too quick to follow. "Different," he replied, his voice carrying a new resonance. "Stronger. more connected. Faye nodded in agreement, her antennae quivering with heightened sensitivity. I can sense the pheromones around us with incredible precision, she added. It's as if I can see the chemical landscape of the entire facility. Before Dr. Reeves could respond, Colonel Hawthorne burst into the lab, his face grim. We've received an emergency transmission from Zara's team, he announced. They've discovered a massive pheromone amplification device in Vexra's stronghold. It's powered by an ancient Wadi artifact and capable of influencing entire star systems. Greg and Faye exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. We're ready, Greg stated, rising from the examination table with fluid grace. You've just undergone a major physiological change, Dr. Reeves protested. We don't know the full extent of your new abilities or potential side effects. There's no time, Faye countered, her antennae twitching with drive. We're the best chance you have of stopping Vexra. Colonel Hawthorne nodded grimly. She's right. We're authorizing an immediate assault on the stronghold. You two will lead the mission. As the group moved to exit the lab, they were met by a squad of Project Chimera operatives, their eyes wide with a newfound intensity. Sir, one of them addressed Colonel Hawthorne, we've been experiencing changes since the containment breach. Increased strength, enhanced reflexes. We want to join the assault team. Dr. Reeves quickly scanned the group, her eyebrows rising in surprise. It seems exposure to Greg and Faye's synchronized pheromones has awakened latent abilities in some of our personnel, she explained. This could provide an unexpected advantage. Within hours, the assault team was assembled and boarding advanced stealth ships. Dr. Reeves provided Greg and Faye with specially designed suits to help regulate their pheromone output during the operation. As the ships lifted off, Greg and Faye sat side by side, their bodies humming with newfound energy. Through their enhanced connection, they could sense the anticipation and fear of the crew around them, the willpower of their fellow enhanced operatives, and the looming threat of Vexra's stronghold. The stealth ships cut through space, their advanced systems rendering them nearly invisible to conventional detection methods. As they approached their target, the true scale of Vexra's operation became apparent. A massive space station loomed before them, its surface dripping with defensive weaponry. We're picking up a defensive line of enhanced soldiers, the pilot announced, her voice tense. They're using some kind of pheromone-based shielding technology. Greg and Faye stood, moving in perfect synchronization. We'll handle this, Greg stated, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. As the ship's airlock opened, Greg and Faye launched themselves into space, their suits automatically adjusting to the vacuum. They moved as one, their combined pheromone output creating a visible disturbance in the fabric of space around them. The enhanced soldiers guarding the station turned to face this new threat, their own pheromone fields flaring in response. But as Greg and Faye approached, their synchronized abilities kicked into high gear. They wove through the enemy formation, their movements too fast and too precise to track. Where Greg and Faye passed, the enemy soldiers faltered, their pheromone-based defenses disrupted by the potent, stabilizing compound produced by the synchronized pair. A path opened up through the defensive line, allowing the rest of the assault team to follow in their wake. As they breached the outer defenses of Vexra's stronghold, alarms blared throughout the station. Greg and Faye landed on the hull, their enhanced senses immediately picking up the frantic activity within. The amplification device is powering up, Faye reported, her antennae quivering with the intensity of the pheromone signals she was detecting. Vexra's accelerating her plans. Greg nodded, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the task ahead. Then we'd better move fast, he replied, his voice carrying a hint of the immense power now at his command. Together, they punched through the station's outer hull, creating an entry point for the assault team. As they pushed deeper into the stronghold, Greg and Faye's synchronized abilities continued to evolve. They found themselves sharing sensory information, anticipating threats before they materialized, and coordinating their actions with inhuman precision. The rest of the assault team followed in their wake, the newly empowered Project Chimera operatives holding their own against Vexra's enhanced forces. But as they fought their way through increasingly difficult obstacles, it became clear that time was running out. The central chamber loomed ahead, the pulsing energy of the amplification device growing stronger with each passing moment. Greg and Faye exchanged a look, their enhanced connection allowing them to communicate without words. They knew that what lay beyond those doors would determine not just the outcome of this mission, but potentially the future of both human and Wadi civilizations. With a shared breath, they prepared to face whatever Vexa had in store for them, their synchronized abilities pushed to their limits as they stepped into the unknown. Chamber, they were met with a sight that defied imagination. The amplification device towered before them, a twisted amalgamation of Wadi technology and Vexa's corrupted vision. Pulsating waves of pheromone energy radiated from its core, distorting the air and making it difficult to breathe. Vexa stood at the controls, her eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. "You're too late," she hissed, her voice carrying an unnatural resonance. "With this device, I'll reshape the very fabric of our civilizations." Greg and Faye moved as one, their synchronized abilities allowing them to dodge the barrage of energy bolts Vexa launched their way. As they closed in on the amplification device, they felt its power washing over them, threatening to overwhelm their senses. "We need to shut it down," Faye communicated through their mental link, her antennae quivering with the intensity of the pheromone field surrounding them. Greg nodded, reaching out to touch the device's control panel. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy coursed through his body. Faye grabbed his arm, instinctively trying to pull him back, but instead found herself connected to the same overwhelming force. The chamber filled with blinding light as Greg and Faye's bodies began to glow, their skin taking on an iridescent sheen. Tendrils of energy snaked out from their forms, intertwining with the pulsating core of the amplification device. "What's happening to them?" Colonel Hawthorne's voice crackled over the comms, thick with concern. Dr. Reeves, monitoring the situation from a safe distance, frantically analyzed the incoming data. "Their synchronized physiology is acting as a natural stabilizer," she reported, her voice filled with a mix of awe and apprehension. "They're absorbing and redirecting the pheromone energy." Greg and Faye stood frozen, their bodies now conduits for the immense power flowing through the device. Through their enhanced connection, they could sense the volatility of Vexa's formula and instinctively began to counter it with their own stabilized signature. Vexa, realizing her plan was unraveling, let out a primal scream of rage. She lunged at the pair, her own enhanced body crackling with unstable energy. As she entered the field of stabilized pheromones surrounding Greg and Faye, her powers began to fluctuate wildly. "Now!" Colonel Hawthorne ordered, seizing the opportunity. His team moved in, wielding specially designed restraints. They grappled with Vexa, whose once formidable abilities now sparked and sputtered unpredictably. As Vexa was subdued, the amplification device reached a critical point. The influx of stabilized pheromones caused it to overload, threatening to explode and release a massive burst of energy that could affect entire star systems. Greg and Faye, still connected to the machine, realized the danger. Without words, they understood what needed to be done. They began to channel the excess energy through their bodies, directing it upwards through the stronghold's superstructure. The entire station shuddered as the energy surged through its framework. Outside, in the planet's upper atmosphere, a spectacular display of aurora-like lights blossomed, visible from space as the pheromone energy harmlessly dissipated. The effort of channeling such immense power took its toll. As the last of the excess energy dispersed, Greg and Faye collapsed, their bodies still emitting a faint glow. The assault team rushed to their aid, quickly moving them to a secure medical facility within their transport ship. Dr. Reeves hurried to examine the unconscious pair, her eyes widening as she analyzed their biosignatures. "Their DNA. It's undergone significant changes," she reported, her voice hushed with amazement. "The human and Wadi genetic structures have integrated in ways I never thought possible." As the transport ship sped away from Vexa's now neutralized stronghold, reports began flooding in from various worlds. Individuals exposed to the stabilized pheromones during the battle were manifesting enhanced abilities, though to a lesser degree than Greg and Faye. Colonel Hawthorne received an urgent communication from the Joint Human Wadi Command. "We've got a situation developing," he informed Dr. Reeves, his brow furrowed. The pheromone exposure has triggered latent genetic potential in both species. The brass is calling for an emergency session to discuss the implications. Dr. Reeves nodded, her mind already racing with the potential consequences of this unplanned evolutionary leap. She turned her attention back to Greg and Faye, who lay side by side in the medical bay, their hands unconsciously intertwined. As she monitored their vital signs, Dr. Reeves noticed something extraordinary. The couple's brainwave patterns were perfectly synchronized, oscillating in a complex rhythm she had never seen before. It was as if their mental connection had deepened beyond anything previously observed between two individuals. "What have we unleashed?" she whispered to herself, both excited and apprehensive about the challenges that lay ahead. The transport ship continued its journey back to Earth, carrying not just the heroes of the mission, but also the seeds of a transformation that would reshape the future of both human and Wadi civilizations. As Greg and Faye slumbered, their bodies adapting to their newfound abilities, the galaxy around them braced for a new era of unprecedented change and discovery. The transport ship docked at a specialized medical facility on Earth, its precious cargo carefully transferred to a high-security wing. Greg and Faye, still unconscious, were immediately placed under the care of Dr. Reeves and her team of experts. Days passed as the pair remained in a coma-like state, their bodies pulsing with residual energy from their encounter with the amplification device. Dr. Reeves worked tirelessly, monitoring their condition and analyzing the ongoing changes to their physiology. On the seventh day, Greg's eyes fluttered open, followed moments later by Faye's. They instinctively reached for each other, their hands intertwining as they took in their surroundings. "Welcome back," Dr. Reeves said softly, approaching their beds. "How do you feel?" Greg sat up slowly, his muscles rippling with newfound strength. "Different," he replied, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "Stronger, more connected." Faye nodded in agreement, her antennae twitching as she processed the myriad of sensory inputs flooding her enhanced nervous system. "It's like I can feel everything around us," she added, her eyes wide with wonder. Dr. Reeves began a series of tests, cataloging the extent of their transformations. Greg's muscle density had increased dramatically, while Faye's skin now bore a subtle pattern of iridescent scales. Their reflexes and sensory perception had been heightened beyond anything previously recorded in either human or Wadi subjects. As the days progressed, Greg and Faye underwent intensive rehabilitation and training to master their new abilities. The facility, specially designed to contain and study enhanced individuals, became their home and proving ground. During one particularly strenuous training session, Greg felt a surge of energy building within him. Before he could react, a potent burst of pheromones erupted from his body, flooding the training area. Alarms blared as the facility's systems detected the sudden spike in pheromone levels. "Containment breach in Training Room 3, an automated voice announced, initiating lockdown procedures. Faye rushed to Greg's side, her own pheromones instinctively reacting to stabilize his output. Dr. Reeves and her team, protected by specialized suits, worked quickly to ventilate the area and neutralize the excess pheromones. "I'm sorry," Greg said, his face flushed with embarrassment and exertion. "I didn't mean to—" Dr. Reeves held up a hand to silence him. "This is exactly why we're here," she assured him, "to help you learn control. But it's clear we need to develop more advanced containment measures." In the weeks that followed, Dr. Reeves and her team worked tirelessly to create new suppression technology. They designed specially fitted suits for Greg and Faye, incorporating advanced materials that could regulate their pheromone output while still allowing for the use of their abilities. As Greg and Faye made progress in controlling their enhanced physiology, reports began flooding in from across human and Wadi territories. Individuals exposed to the stabilized pheromones during the battle at Vexa's stronghold were manifesting abilities of their own. The United Earth Government and Wadi High Council implemented a galaxy-wide screening program to identify and monitor these enhanced individuals. 6 months after their initial recovery, Greg and Faye were deemed ready for active duty. Colonel Hawthorne briefed them on their first assignment, investigating a secret research facility hidden within a remote asteroid. Intelligence suggests that remnants of Vexa's organization have set up shop there, Hawthorne explained, his face grim. We need you to infiltrate the facility and gather any information you can about their current operations. Greg and Faye nodded in unison, their enhanced connection allowing them to communicate without words. They donned their new containment suits, sleek and form-fitting, designed to give them maximum mobility while regulating their pheromone output. The stealth ship carrying Greg, Faye, and a small team of operatives slipped silently through space, approaching the asteroid that housed the secret facility. As they neared their target, Greg and Faye's enhanced senses kicked into high gear, allowing them to detect the subtle energy signatures of the base's defensive systems. There, Faye whispered, pointing to a seemingly solid section of the asteroid's surface. I can sense a hidden airlock. Greg nodded, guiding the ship towards the concealed entrance. With precision born from months of training, he manipulated his pheromone output to interface with the airlock's control systems. The door slid open silently, granting them access to the facility's interior. The team moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors, Greg and Faye taking point. Their synchronized abilities allowed them to anticipate and neutralize security measures before they could be triggered. As they approached the central laboratory, a familiar scent caught Faye's attention. Her antennae twitched rapidly as she processed the information. Greg, she said urgently, I'm detecting pheromone signatures similar to ours. Before Greg could respond, a group of figures emerged from the shadows ahead. Their movements were fluid and unnaturally fast, reminiscent of Greg and Faye's own enhanced abilities. As they stepped into the light, the team was shocked to see that these individuals bore characteristics of both humans and Wadi. Hybrids, Dr. Reeves's voice crackled over their comms, her tone a mix of fascination and concern. They must have used data from your medical files to create them. The hybrid soldiers moved to attack, their bodies crackling with unstable energy. Greg and Faye sprang into action, their months of training paying off as they worked in perfect tandem. They weaved through the group of hybrids, using their superior control and stability to counter the erratic attacks. We need to subdue them without causing permanent harm, Greg communicated to Faye through their mental link. She nodded, adjusting her pheromone output to create a calming field around them. The battle was intense but brief. Greg's enhanced strength and Faye's nimble movements, combined with their stabilizing pheromones, proved too much for the unstable hybrids. One by one, the soldiers collapsed, overwhelmed by the synchronized assault. As the last hybrid fell unconscious, Greg and Faye turned their attention to the laboratory. Banks of computers lined the walls, filled with data on the hybrid creation process. They quickly began downloading the information, knowing it would be crucial for understanding and potentially helping these artificial enhanced individuals. We've got company, one of their team members announced, monitoring the facility's security feeds. Looks like we triggered some kind of alert system. More hostiles are heading our way. Greg and Faye exchanged a determined look. They had completed their primary objective, but the real challenge was just beginning. As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors, they prepared themselves for the fight ahead, their bodies humming with the power of their synchronized abilities. The hybrid soldiers, though formidable, were no match for Greg and Faye's superior control and teamwork. As the last of their opponents fell unconscious, Greg and Faye exchanged a brief glance, their enhanced connection allowing them to communicate without words. They knew their mission was just the beginning. Team, secure the area, Greg ordered, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. We need to access the main database. The operatives moved swiftly, securing the unconscious hybrids and setting up a defensive perimeter. Meanwhile, Greg and Faye approached the central computer terminal, their containment suits humming softly as they regulated their pheromone output. Faye's antennae twitched as she interfaced with the system, her enhanced abilities allowing her to navigate the complex security protocols with ease. I'm in, she announced, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Initiating data extraction now. As the download began, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red warning lights bathed the room in an eerie glow, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridors beyond. We've got company, one of the team members reported, monitoring the security feeds. Multiple hostiles converging on our position. Greg's muscles tensed, ready for action. Faye, keep working on that download. Everyone else, prepare for incoming. The team took up defensive positions as Greg and Faye coordinated their abilities. They began emitting a carefully calibrated pheromone field, designed to confuse and disorient the approaching guards. The first wave of security forces burst through the doors, their weapons raised. Greg and Faye's pheromones hit them like a wall, causing them to stumble and blink in confusion. The team capitalized on this advantage, quickly subduing the disoriented guards. As the battle raged on, Greg felt a sudden surge of energy within him. He glanced down to see a hairline crack in his containment suit, likely damaged during the earlier scuffle with the hybrids. "Faye," he called out urgently, "my suit's compromised." Before Faye could respond, a powerful burst of pheromones erupted from Greg's body. The effect was immediate and intense. Both the security forces and their own team members were engulfed in the cloud, their bodies tensing as heightened aggression took hold. Faye acted swiftly, her own pheromone output increasing to counteract Greg's uncontrolled release. She moved through the chaos, touching each affected individual and using her stabilizing influence to restore balance. "Greg, focus on me," she said, her voice calm and steady as she approached him. "Match your output to mine. We can bring this under control." Greg nodded, concentrating on Faye's familiar pheromone signature. Slowly, the wild surge of energy began to subside, his output aligning with hers until they achieved a stable equilibrium. With the immediate crisis averted, they turned their attention back to the mission at hand. The data extraction was nearly complete, but what they found in Vexa's database shook them to their core. "This can't be right," Faye muttered, her eyes wide as she scanned the information streaming across the screen. "Greg, look at this." Greg leaned in, his enhanced vision allowing him to process the data rapidly. His face hardened as he realized the implications of what they'd uncovered. "Connections to high-ranking officials in both our governments," he said, his voice low. "They've been supporting Vexa's research all along." The weight of this revelation hung heavy in the air. The team exchanged worried glances, understanding that this information could potentially unravel the fragile alliance between humans and Wadi. Before they could discuss their next move, a new alarm sounded, different from the previous one. A computerized voice echoed through the facility. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately." "We need to move now," Greg shouted, his enhanced strength already in action as he began clearing a path through the debris that had accumulated during the fight. Faye quickly transferred the remaining data to a portable device, then joined Greg in leading the team out. Her pheromone abilities guided them through the chaos, sensing areas of imminent collapse and directing the group to safer routes. As they raced through the crumbling facility, Greg and Faye made a split-second decision. They knew they couldn't risk losing the most critical information. In perfect synchronization, they clasped hands, combining their abilities to directly absorb the key data into their own enhanced physiologies. The process was intense and immediate. Greg's skin took on a metallic sheen, while Faye's iridescent scales became more pronounced, spreading across a larger portion of her body. They gasped in unison as the information flooded their systems, but there was no time to process the changes. With a final burst of speed, the team emerged from the facility just as it erupted into a massive fireball. The shockwave hit their transport ship, damaging its systems and leaving them limping towards the nearest safe outpost. As they traveled, Greg and Faye began to experience the side effects of their data absorption. Vivid flashes of Vexa's memories and knowledge assaulted their senses, leaving them disoriented and struggling to maintain control. "Hold on, we're almost there," one of the team members assured them as the outpost came into view. Upon landing, Dr. Elena Reeves and her medical team rushed to meet them. Greg and Faye were quickly ushered into a specialized containment unit, their bodies now emanating a soft, pulsating glow. "Their DNA is undergoing further mutations," Dr. Reeves announced, her voice a mix of concern and scientific fascination as she studied the readouts. "We need to stabilize them before we can even begin to understand what's happening." As the medical team worked feverishly to help Greg and Faye, news of their mission's success and the conspiracy they'd uncovered began to spread. The once secret task force found itself thrust into the spotlight, with both human and Wadi officials demanding answers. In the midst of this growing political storm, Greg and Faye lay side by side in the medical bay, their hands intertwined as their bodies continued to change. Despite their semi-conscious state, their enhanced connection remained strong. Together, they began to formulate a plan, one that could address the public's fears, expose the corruption, and potentially usher in a new era of understanding between enhanced and non-enhanced individuals across the galaxy. As Dr. Reeves monitored their vital signs, she noticed a new phenomenon. Small-scale pheromone fields were beginning to form around Greg and Faye, subtly influencing the emotional states of those nearby. The implications of this development were both thrilling and terrifying. "What are you two becoming?" she whispered, watching as the pheromone fields pulsed in perfect synchronization. Outside the medical bay, the galaxy braced itself for change. Anti-enhancement protests were erupting on multiple worlds, while shadowy figures worked to protect their secrets. And at the center of it all, Greg and Faye continued to evolve, their bodies and minds adapting to the incredible power they now possessed. The stage was set for a conflict that would determine the future of human-Wadi relations and the fate of enhanced individuals throughout the galaxy. As Greg and Faye prepared to face this challenge, they knew that their greatest test was yet to come. The medical bay hummed with activity as Greg and Faye slowly regained consciousness. Their bodies, still emanating a soft glow, pulsed in unison with the small-scale pheromone field surrounding them. Dr. Reeves watched in fascination as the couple's eyes fluttered open, their gazes immediately locking onto each other. "How do you feel?" Dr. Reeves asked, her voice tinged with both concern and scientific curiosity. Greg sat up slowly, his metallic skin catching the light. "Different," he replied, flexing his fingers. "More connected." Faye nodded in agreement, her iridescent scales shimmering as she moved. "It's like we can sense everything around us more acutely." Before Dr. Reeves could respond, an urgent message came through the comm system. "Dr. Reeves, we need Greg and Faye at the construction site immediately. We're facing some unexpected challenges with the broadcast array." The couple exchanged a determined look and quickly rose from their beds. As they made their way to the construction site, they could feel the weight of their new abilities settling into their bones. The massive pheromone broadcast array loomed before them, a complex web of human and Wadi technologies intertwined. Engineers and technicians swarmed around the structure, their faces etched with frustration. "What's the situation?" Greg asked, approaching the lead engineer. "We're having trouble integrating the pheromone amplification modules with the human-designed power grid," the engineer explained, pointing to a series of misaligned components. "The energy output is too unstable." Greg nodded, his enhanced strength already proving useful as he moved to stabilize a wavering support beam. "I think I can help with that. Faye, can you use your pheromone control to calibrate the sensitive instruments?" Faye stepped forward, her antennae twitching as she focused on the delicate equipment. With precise movements, she began adjusting the pheromone output, her enhanced abilities allowing for minute alterations that would have been impossible before. As the couple worked in tandem, the team around them marveled at their efficiency. Hours passed, and slowly but surely, the array began to take shape. The integration of human and Wadi technologies, once a source of frustration, now seemed to flow seamlessly under Greg and Faye's guidance. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the site. Alarms blared as a group of armed individuals breached the outer perimeter defenses. Their weapons crackled with an unfamiliar energy, designed to disrupt pheromone-based abilities. "Anti-enhancement extremists," someone shouted as chaos erupted around them. Greg and Faye sprang into action, their newly developed abilities allowing them to project small-scale pheromone fields. The attackers stumbled, disoriented by the sudden onslaught of conflicting chemical signals. "Team, fall back to the secondary defense line," Greg ordered, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Faye and I will hold them off." The couple moved in perfect synchronization, their pheromone fields expanding and contracting to confuse and repel the attackers. Greg's enhanced strength allowed him to easily overpower those who got too close, while Faye's precise control kept their allies safe from the disruptive effects of their defensive pheromones. As the battle raged on, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Greg! Faye!" Dr. Reeves called out, her face pale with urgency. She fought her way through the melee, clutching a data pad tightly to her chest. "Doctor, what are you doing here?" Faye asked, deflecting an attacker with a well-timed pheromone pulse. "I have critical information about your condition." Dr. Reeves panted, her eyes wide with concern. "The data you absorbed from Vexa's database is causing accelerated mutations in your DNA. Your enhanced abilities are putting significant stress on your bodies. Without intervention, these changes could become irreversible or potentially fatal." The gravity of Dr. Reeves' words hit Greg and Faye hard, but before they could fully process the implications, the sound of approaching aircraft filled the air. A joint human-Wadi task force, led by Colonel Marcus Steele, arrived on the scene, quickly moving to secure the area. As the military forces engaged the remaining attackers, Colonel Steele made his way to Greg and Faye. His initial skepticism was evident in his stern expression, but as he watched the couple effortlessly repel another wave of extremists, his face softened with grudging admiration. "Impressive work," Steele admitted, his eyes darting between Greg and Faye. "I see now why this project is so important." With the immediate threat neutralized, Greg and Faye turned their attention back to Dr. Reeves and the sobering news she had delivered. The doctor presented them with a difficult choice: an experimental treatment that could stabilize their mutations, but would limit their enhanced abilities, or continue as they were, and risk their long-term health. As they contemplated their options, the weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. The future of human-Wadi relations, the success of the broadcast array, and their own lives hung in the balance. Greg and Faye stood at the precipice of a choice that would not only shape their own destinies, but potentially alter the course of two species' shared future. Future. With a shared nod of understanding, Greg and Faye turned to face the broadcast array. The massive structure loomed before them, a testament to the potential of human-Wadi cooperation. As they approached the control panel, their hands intertwined, a gesture that had become second nature to them. "Are you ready?" Greg asked, his metallic skin glinting under the harsh lights. Faye's iridescent scales rippled with anticipation. "As ready as we'll ever be." They placed their hands on the activation panel, their unique physiologies interfacing seamlessly with the hybrid technology. The array hummed to life, its components spinning and aligning as the broadcast prepared to initiate. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the facility. Alarms blared as the power levels spiked far beyond their intended parameters. Greg and Faye stumbled, struggling to maintain their connection to the controls. "What's happening?" Dr. Reeves shouted over the cacophony, her eyes wide with alarm as she stared at the readouts on her datapad. Colonel Steele rushed to a nearby console, his fingers flying over the controls. "There's some kind of feedback loop between the human and Wadi tech. It's amplifying the signal exponentially." Greg gritted his teeth, his enhanced strength straining against the surging power. "We can't shut it down!" Faye's antennae twitched frantically as she tried to modulate the pheromone output. "The broadcast is already spreading beyond our intended range." A blinding flash erupted from the array, momentarily overwhelming their senses. As their vision cleared, they watched in awe and horror as the pheromone wave visibly rippled outward, far more potent than they had ever imagined. Within minutes, reports began flooding in from across multiple star systems. Dr. Reeves' datapad chimed incessantly with incoming data. "The effect is unprecedented," she muttered, her voice a mix of scientific fascination and growing concern. "People are experiencing a level of empathy and cross-species understanding we never thought possible." Colonel Steele's comm unit crackled to life, filled with urgent messages from various military and governmental channels. "It's not just affecting emotions," he reported, his brow furrowed. "We're getting reports of spontaneous mutations. People are developing enhanced abilities similar to yours, though not as potent." Greg and Faye exchanged worried glances, the weight of their actions settling heavily upon them. "We need to stabilize the array," Greg said, already moving towards the main power couplings. Faye nodded, her scales shimmering as she focused her abilities on the pheromone modulators. If we can't shut it down, we can at least try to prevent further amplification. As they worked frantically to contain the situation, the facility buzzed with activity. Engineers and scientists rushed to analyze the cascade of data pouring in from affected worlds. The air was thick with tension and the lingering effects of the enhanced pheromones. Dr. Reeves approached them, her face pale but determined. The broadcast is accelerating the integration process between human and Wadi physiologies. It's most pronounced in areas where our species have been cohabiting. Before they could fully process this information, Colonel Steele strode over, his comm unit still buzzing with activity. "You two need to see this," he said, activating a nearby holo projector. The projection flickered to life, showing news feeds from various worlds. Political leaders were stepping down en masse, many openly admitting to their involvement in the anti-enhancement conspiracy. In their place, new figures were emerging, their eyes alight with a newfound understanding and purpose. "The political landscape is shifting dramatically," Steele explained, his voice tight with terrifying awe. "This broadcast has done more for human-Wadi relations in hours than years of diplomacy." Greg and Faye watched the unfolding scenes, their emotions a turbulent mix of pride, fear, and grit. They had set out to bridge the gap between their species, but the scale of what they had unleashed was beyond anything they had imagined. "We need to get out there," Faye said, turning to Greg. "People will need guidance, especially those experiencing sudden enhancements." Greg nodded, already formulating a plan. "We'll need a team. Dr. Reeves, can you coordinate from here? We'll need constant updates on the broadcast effects." "Of course," Dr. Reeves replied, her scientific curiosity clearly piqued by the challenge. Colonel Steele stepped forward, his posture straight and determined. "I'll arrange transportation and security. We'll need to move fast to stay ahead of this." As the team bustled around them, preparing for the monumental task ahead, Greg and Faye took a moment to center themselves. Their enhanced senses tingled with the residual energy of the broadcast, a constant reminder of the change they had set in motion. "Ready for another adventure?" Greg asked, a hint of a smile playing on his metallic features. Faye's scales shimmered with perseverance. "Always. Let's go show the galaxy what true integration looks like." With a final glance at the now stabilized broadcast array, they set off, ready to face the challenges that awaited them across the stars. As they boarded their transport, reports of awakening Wadi biotech in ancient ruins began to trickle in, hinting at yet another layer to their already complex mission. The ship's engines roared to life, propelling them towards an uncertain future. Greg and Faye stood at the viewport, watching as the facility receded into the distance. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, embodiments of the very integration they had fought so hard to achieve. As the ship entered hyperspace, Greg and Faye felt a sudden jolt of unease. Their enhanced senses tingled with an unfamiliar energy, growing stronger as they approached their destination. "Something's different," Faye said, her antennae twitching rapidly. "I can feel it in my very cells." Greg nodded, his metallic skin rippling with an iridescent sheen. "It's like our bodies are trying to tell us something." The ship dropped out of hyperspace, revealing a planet shrouded in swirling mists. As they descended through the atmosphere, ancient Wadi ruins came into view, their bioorganic structures pulsing with a faint, rhythmic glow. "This is it," Dr. Reeves's voice crackled over the comm. "The largest concentration of active Wadi biotech we've detected so far." As Greg and Faye stepped off the ship, the ground beneath their feet seemed to respond to their presence. Tendrils of bioluminescent energy snaked across the surface, converging on a massive structure at the center of the ruins. "The chamber," Faye whispered, her scales shimmering with anticipation. They approached the entrance, their hybrid physiology triggering a series of complex mechanisms. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a cavernous space filled with pulsating organic technology. As they stepped inside, the chamber came alive. Holographic displays flickered to life, projecting streams of data in both human and Wadi languages. Greg and Faye moved deeper into the room, their bodies resonating with the energy permeating the air. Suddenly, a beam of light enveloped them. Greg felt his skin tingle as the chamber's systems began scanning their unique physiology. Faye gasped as her antennae elongated, becoming more sensitive to the swirling pheromones around them. "Greg, look!" Faye exclaimed, her voice a mix of wonder and alarm. Greg glanced down at his hands, watching as his metallic skin began to emit a soft, pulsating glow. He could feel his body changing, his features subtly shifting to reflect a more perfect blend of human and wadi traits. The process was intense, bordering on painful, but neither Greg nor Faye could bring themselves to interrupt it. They stood locked in place as the chamber's ancient systems worked to recalibrate their genetics. Outside the chamber, Dr. Reeves monitored the situation from her mobile research station. Her eyes widened as she observed the readings from Greg and Faye's biosensors. "Colonel Steele," she called out, her voice urgent, "you need to see this." Steele hurried over, his brow furrowing as he took in the data. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" "Their genetic structure is being rewritten at an unprecedented rate," Dr. Reeves explained. "And it's not just them. We're getting reports of similar phenomena occurring at other wadi sites across multiple worlds." As if on cue, the communication channels erupted with a flurry of activity. Reports flooded in from various planets, describing scenes eerily similar to what was happening with Greg and Faye. Inside the chamber, the recalibration process reached its peak. Greg and Faye's bodies glowed with an intense light, their features shifting and settling into a new form that perfectly balanced their human and wadi heritage. As the light faded, they found themselves standing amidst a sea of holographic data. Their enhanced minds easily interpreted the complex information, revealing the existence of a vast network of wadi outposts spread across the galaxy. "This is incredible," Greg breathed, his voice resonating with a new timbre. "We can access the entire database of ancient wadi technology." Faye nodded, her newly elongated antennae twitching with excitement. "And we know how to use it." As they absorbed the knowledge, they became aware of a new sensation. A unique pheromone was emanating from their bodies, different from anything they had experienced before. Outside, Dr. Reeves's instruments detected the change. "The pheromone levels are off the chart," she reported to Steele. "And it's not just Greg and Faye. Everyone who's undergone this recalibration is emitting the same compound." Steele's comm unit buzzed with urgent messages. "We're getting reports of rapid changes in political structures on both human and wadi world," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Leaders who have undergone this recalibration are emerging, calling for a new form of integrated government." As Greg and Faye emerged from the chamber, they were met with a scene of organized chaos. Their team members stared at them in awe, many already showing signs of their own impending transformations. "We need to move quickly," Greg said, his enhanced mind already formulating a plan. "There's a network of outposts out there, each containing technology that could revolutionize both our societies." Faye nodded in agreement. "But we're not the only ones aware of this now. We need to be prepared for resistance." As if in response to her words, an alert flashed across the nearby screens. Reports of attacks on research facilities and integration centers scrolled by, accompanied by grainy footage of militant groups calling themselves the Purists. "Looks like not everyone is on board with this new future," Steele growled, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Greg and Faye exchanged a determined look. They had come too far to let fear and ignorance halt the progress they had made. "We'll need to split our focus," Greg said, addressing the team. "Half of us will continue activating the outposts. The rest will work on developing defenses against these Purist attacks." As the team bustled into action, Greg and Faye stood at the center of the storm, their newly recalibrated bodies humming with potential. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but they were ready to face them head-on. The ancient wadi chamber pulsed behind them, a testament to the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. As they prepared to embark on their next mission, neither Greg nor Faye could shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far greater than they had ever imagined. As Greg and Faye prepared to embark on their next mission, their plans were suddenly interrupted by an urgent alert from the long-range sensors. "We've detected an anomaly at the edge of known space," Dr. Reeves announced, her eyes scanning the incoming data. The Joint Council is ordering us to investigate immediately. Colonel Steele nodded, already adjusting their course. Looks like our outpost activation plans will have to wait. This takes priority. The team quickly boarded their advanced hybrid vessel, a marvel of integrated human-wadi technology. As they settled into their positions, Greg and Faye felt a new connection forming between themselves and the ship's systems. Are you feeling this? Greg asked, his metallic skin rippling with energy. Faye nodded, her antennae twitching. It's like we're becoming one with the ship. As they journeyed towards the anomaly, Greg and Faye explored their newfound abilities. They discovered they could interface directly with the ship's biomechanical systems, enhancing its performance beyond anything they had previously achieved. Efficiency's up by 30%, one of the engineers reported, amazement clear in his voice. Response time has nearly doubled. The trip to the anomaly's coordinates passed quickly, filled with intense training sessions as the team adapted to their evolving capabilities. As they dropped out of faster-than-light travel, a massive structure came into view. By the stars, Dr. Reeves breathed, her eyes wide. It's a space station, and it's like nothing we've ever seen before. The station hung motionless against the backdrop of space, its design a perfect blend of technological precision and organic flow. It dwarfed their vessel, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Scans indicate it's dormant, Steele reported. But the technology, it's beyond anything in our databases. Greg and Faye exchanged a look. We need to go aboard, Greg said. Faye and I will lead a small team. Our enhanced physiology might give us an edge in dealing with any security measures. As they approached the station in a smaller craft, its surface seemed to react to their presence. Patterns of light danced across its hull, forming complex sequences that shifted and changed with dizzying speed. It's adaptive, Faye realized. The security system is evolving in real time. Using their enhanced senses and newly developed abilities, Greg and Faye worked in perfect synchronization. They guided the team through the station's defenses, their minds processing the changing patterns faster than any computer. Once inside, they found themselves in a vast chamber filled with technology that seemed to blur the line between machine and living organism. Holographic displays flickered to life around them, responding to their presence. These are logs, Dr. Reeves said, her fingers dancing over a nearby console. They're describing some kind of conflict, a war against a hive mind species. As they delved deeper into the station's archives, a chilling picture emerged. The logs detailed a desperate struggle against a species capable of consuming entire worlds, a threat so great it had united the ancient integrated civilization in a last-ditch effort to survive. The station, Greg said, his voice hushed with awe, it's not just a research facility, it's a weapon, a last line of defense. Before they could fully process this revelation, the station around them began to hum with awakening energy. Lights flickered on throughout the vast structure, systems long dormant springing to life. What's happening? Steele demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Faye's antennae twitched rapidly. We've triggered something. The station, it's activating. A massive holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a map of the galaxy. Points of light began to appear across its surface, each one representing a station similar to the one they stood in. It's a network, Dr. Reeves breathed, and we've just turned it on. As the network of stations powered up, a powerful signal began to emanate from each one, detectable across vast distances of space. The team watched in a mixture of awe and trepidation as the signal spread, knowing that they had set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy. Suddenly, their communication channels erupted with urgent messages from home. Reports flooded in of widespread technological disruptions across human and Wadi worlds. Integration centers were experiencing power surges, accelerating the recalibration process for those undergoing transformation. The activation of the network is affecting our world, Steele reported, his face grim. We're seeing a sudden spike in enhanced individuals. It's straining resources, causing social upheaval. Before they could fully grasp the implications of this development, another alert came through. The purist movement, taking advantage of the chaos, had launched a coordinated attack on key integration centers. Greg's face hardened with purpose. We need to split up. I'll take a team back to defend the centers. Faye, you stay here and continue the investigation. We need to know everything we can about this network and the threat it was built to fight. As Greg's team prepared to depart, Faye's group pressed deeper into the station. They found themselves facing a sealed chamber, its surface pulsing with bioluminescent energy. There's something in there, Faye said, her enhanced senses picking up faint life signs. Something alive. As they worked to open the chamber, Greg's team raced back toward home, knowing that the fate of both their species hung in the balance. The ancient station hummed around them, its secrets only beginning to unfold, while across the galaxy, the first tremors of a long-dormant threat began to stir. Stir. The ancient station trembled, its systems fully awakening for the first time in millennia. Greg's team had barely made it back to their ship when the urgent transmission from Faye came through. Her voice crackled with static, but the excitement was unmistakable. Greg, you need to get back here now. The survivors, they're awake, and they have critical information about the hive mind invasion. Without hesitation, Greg ordered the ship to reverse course. As they sped back towards the ancient station, reports flooded in from across human and Wadi territories. The purest attacks on integration centers had been fierce, but thanks to the enhanced abilities of the defenders, they had been successfully repelled. Upon reuniting with Faye's team at the station, Greg was struck by the gravity of the situation. The awakened survivors, their forms a perfect blend of organic and technological components, shared their knowledge through a series of rapid data transfers. Within hours, Greg and Faye found themselves standing before the Joint Council in a hastily established command center within one of the largest integration centers. The room hummed with tension as they presented the information gathered from the ancient station. The hive mind species nearly wiped out the integrated civilization, Greg explained, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. But they managed to create this network of defense stations as a last resort. Faye stepped forward, her antennae twitching as she interfaced with the holographic display. We've recovered detailed schematics of the defense network, as well as predictions for when the hive mind will resurge. The council members exchanged worried glances as the gravity of the situation sank in. After a brief deliberation, they voted unanimously to implement a galaxy-wide mobilization plan. We're redirecting all available resources towards reactivating and upgrading the ancient defense stations, the council leader announced. Greg, Faye, we're tasking you with leading a special task force to coordinate these efforts. Without wasting a moment, Greg and Faye set to work. They established a series of training facilities across human and Wadi territories, utilizing advanced simulation technology derived from the ancient station. Enhanced individuals from both species flocked to these centers, eager to hone their abilities for the coming conflict. In one such facility, Greg observed a group of trainees as they faced off against a simulated hive mind swarm. The air crackled with energy as the enhanced humans and Wadi worked in perfect synchronization, their movements fluid and precise. Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Reeves and her research team made a breakthrough that would change the course of their preparations. In her lab, surrounded by holographic displays and complex biomechanical interfaces, she turned to Greg and Faye with a look of triumph. We've done it, she announced. We've synthesized the pheromones produced by fully integrated hybrids. This new treatment can boost the abilities of both humans and Wadi without requiring full genetic recalibration. Greg and Faye exchanged a look before volunteering to undergo the treatment themselves. As they stepped into the specially designed chamber, Greg felt a tingling sensation spread across his skin. He watched in fascination as his flesh took on a subtle, armor-like quality. Beside him, Faye gasped as her sensory organs sharpened, becoming more acute. As the treatment concluded, they both felt a surge of power coursing through their bodies. Their enhanced abilities were put to the test sooner than expected. Intelligence reports uncovered a hidden purist base on a remote moon, housing a powerful communications array capable of disrupting the defense network. Greg led a strike team to neutralize this threat, their ship cutting silently through the void of space. As they approached the moon's surface, Greg interfaced directly with the ship's systems, guiding it through a field of sensor buoys with inhuman precision. The team infiltrated the base, moving with enhanced speed and agility. However, they soon encountered unexpected resistance. Purist forces, equipped with reverse-engineered ancient technology, put up a fierce fight. In the heat of battle, Greg's newly enhanced strength and tactical acumen shone. He moved with blinding speed, disarming opponents and neutralizing threats before they could react. His skin deflected energy blasts that would have incapacitated him before the treatment. After a grueling conflict, Greg's team successfully disabled the communications array. As they secured the base, they uncovered evidence that sent a chill down Greg's spine. The Purists had established similar installations throughout the galaxy. Back at the command center, Faye coordinated a series of simultaneous strikes against known Purist strongholds. Her enhanced senses allowed her to pick up on subtle energy fluctuations, pinpointing weaknesses in the Purist defenses. As strike teams across multiple star systems engaged the enemy, Faye's strategic guidance proved invaluable. One by one, Purist installations fell, their threat to the defense network neutralized. The conflict with the Purists had barely subsided when long-range sensors picked up the first signs of the Hive mind fleet. The massive swarm of biomechanical ships entered the outer reaches of the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. Greg and Faye's task force kicked into high gear, deploying specialized teams to each ancient defense station. They worked tirelessly, racing against time to bring the full network online. As each station activated, it released a pulse of energy that rippled across space, enhancing the abilities of nearby integrated individuals. The effect cascaded across human and Wadi populations, creating a wave of increasing power. Finally, after days of non-stop effort, the majority of the defense network hummed to life. Greg and Faye stood at the central control hub of the ancient station, their enhanced bodies interfacing seamlessly with the advanced systems. With a shared look of commitment, they initiated a test firing of the network's primary weapon system. Energy coalesced from multiple stations, forming a massive beam that struck a designated target at the edge of the galaxy. The small moon they had chosen as a target vaporized instantly, demonstrating the awesome power now at their disposal. As cheers erupted throughout the command center, Greg and Faye allowed themselves a moment of celebration. However, their victory was short-lived. Long-range sensors suddenly lit up with alarming data. The Hive mind fleet had accelerated its advance, suggesting they were now aware of the defense network's reactivation. Greg and Faye exchanged a grim look, knowing that the true test of their preparations was about to begin. The enemy that had once brought down an entire civilization was bearing down on them, and the fate of both human and Wadi hung in the balance. Balance. The enemy that had once brought down an entire civilization was bearing down on them, and the fate of both human and Wadi hung in the balance. Greg's enhanced senses picked up a subtle shift in the station's energy output. He turned to Faye, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. There was no time to waste. "We need to mobilize everything we have," Greg said, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. "Faye, coordinate with the Joint Council. We need a galaxy-wide evacuation plan, starting with the outer colonies." Faye nodded, her antennae already twitching as she established multiple communication channels. "On it. I'll prioritize the most vulnerable systems first." As Faye worked on the evacuation efforts, Greg assembled a team of engineers and technicians. "We're heading to the forward defense stations," he announced. "Those will be our first line of defense against the Hive mind fleet." Within hours, Greg's team was en route to the outermost defense station. As their ship docked, Greg felt the familiar tingle of his enhanced physiology interfacing with the ancient technology. He moved through the station with purpose, his body in perfect sync with the surroundings. "Install the upgraded power cores here," Greg instructed, gesturing to a massive chamber humming with energy, "and make sure the targeting systems are calibrated to the latest specs." As his team worked, Greg placed his hand on a nearby console. His eyes closed, and he felt his consciousness expand, merging with the station's systems. With his enhanced abilities, he could sense every fluctuation in power, every minute adjustment in the targeting arrays. "Impressive," one of the engineers remarked, watching Greg work. He's optimizing the systems beyond anything we could achieve manually. Meanwhile, Faye oversaw the deployment of the early warning system from the central command hub. She monitored a vast array of holographic displays, each showing the progress of sensor buoy placement throughout the galaxy's outer regions. "Status update on Sector 7, Faye commanded, her voice crisp and clear. A technician responded promptly. "Sensor grid online and operational, ma'am. We're receiving real-time data on all movement within a 50 light-year radius." Faye nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent. Let's move on to Sector 8. As the preparations continued, Dr. Elena Reeves burst into the command center, her eyes wide with excitement. "We've done it!" she exclaimed, holding up a data pad. "The Pheromone weaponization tests were successful." Faye's antennae perked up with interest. "Show me." Dr. Reeves activated a holographic display showing footage of hive mind drones exposed to the weaponized pheromones. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The drones stumbled, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. "This could be the edge we need," Faye said, her mind racing with tactical possibilities. "How soon can we begin mass production?" "We're converting manufacturing facilities as we speak," Dr. Reeves replied. "But there's more. We believe we can enhance your and Greg's pheromone production capabilities. It would make you living weapons against the hive mind." Faye didn't hesitate. "Do it." Hours later, Greg returned from the defense station upgrades to find Faye emerging from the treatment chamber. Her skin glistened with a new, almost opalescent quality. As he approached, he felt a wave of complex emotions and tactical information wash over him, transmitted by Faye's enhanced pheromones. "It's incredible," Faye said, her voice filled with awe. "I can sense everything around me with such clarity." Before Greg could respond, alarms blared throughout the command center. A technician called out, "Multiple hive mind ships detected entering the outer reaches of controlled space." Greg and Faye exchanged a look of fierce dedication. The moment they had prepared for had arrived. "Activate the defense network," Greg ordered, his voice steady and commanding. "Coordinate fire on the lead ships. Let's see what these upgrades can do." The ancient weapons roared to life, streams of energy lancing out across vast distances of space. The first wave of hive mind ships erupted into brilliant explosions, their biomechanical forms unable to withstand the concentrated assault. As Greg coordinated the defense from the command center, Faye prepared for a more direct approach. "I'm taking a strike team to board one of the damaged vessels," she announced. "We need more intelligence on their capabilities." Greg nodded, knowing the risks, but also the necessity of the mission. "Be careful," he said, the words carrying more weight than ever before. Faye's team moved swiftly through the corridors of the crippled hive mind ship. Her enhanced senses allowed her to navigate the alien environment with ease, avoiding traps and patrols. "This way," she whispered, leading her team towards a pulsing energy signature. They entered a vast chamber dominated by a towering biomechanical structure. "That's the central node. Cover me while I interface with it." As Faye connected with the alien technology, her mind was flooded with data. She saw the structure of the hive mind fleet, the locations of key command ships hidden among the swarm, but her intrusion didn't go unnoticed. Alarms screeched throughout the ship, and the sound of approaching drones filled the air. "We've got company," one of her team members warned. Faye disconnected from the node, her mind racing with the new information. "Fall back to the extraction point," she ordered. As they retreated, they encountered a group of hive mind drones blocking their path. Faye focused, feeling the new glands in her skin activating. She released a burst of concentrated pheromones, watching as the drones immediately became disoriented. "Now," she shouted, and her team pushed through the confused enemy, making their way back to their ship. Back at the command center, Faye's intel proved invaluable. Greg recalibrated the defense network, targeting the newly identified command ships with precision strikes. "Multiple confirmed hits on hive mind command vessels," a technician reported. "We're seeing widespread disarray in their fleet formations." Greg seized the opportunity, directing a series of coordinated attacks that further fractured the enemy's offensive capabilities. But even as they celebrated these victories, new reports came flooding in. Sir, we're receiving distress calls from multiple integration centers, an officer announced. Purist forces are launching coordinated attacks across the core systems. Greg's face hardened. The Purists, in their misguided opposition to human-Wadi integration, were threatening to undermine their defenses at this crucial moment. Dispatch our elite hybrid teams to defend those facilities, Greg ordered. We can't afford to lose our pheromone weapon production. As the battle raged across multiple fronts, Greg and Faye found themselves at the heart of a conflict that would determine the fate of their civilizations. The hive mind's advance had been slowed, but a significant portion of their fleet was still pushing towards the core worlds. In a rare quiet moment amidst the chaos, Greg and Faye stood together, their enhanced physiologies allowing them to communicate volumes without words. They knew that the coming hours would test them like never before, as they prepared to make their stand in the heart of human-Wadi space. The command center buzzed with activity around them as reports of both victories and setbacks poured in from across the galaxy. Greg and Faye shared one last look of understanding before turning to face the challenges ahead, each heading to their respective stations to lead the forces under their command. The next phase of the battle was about to begin, and the fate of two species hung in the balance. The command center fell silent as Greg and Faye absorbed the gravity of the situation. The hive mind fleet had breached their outer defenses, and the core worlds now lay exposed to the imminent threat. Greg's eyes met Faye's, a silent understanding passing between them. It's time, Greg said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Activate the orbital platforms. Faye nodded, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface, initiating pheromone dispersal systems now. Across the core worlds, massive orbital platforms hummed to life. They released a concentrated mist of human-Wadi hybrid pheromones into the upper atmospheres, creating a shimmering protective barrier against the invading forces. As the pheromone shield took form, long-range sensors blared a new alert. Greg's attention snapped to the main display, where a massive hive mind command ship appeared, its trajectory aimed directly at their most populous colony. I'm taking a strike team to intercept that command ship, Greg announced, already moving towards the exit. Faye, coordinate the defense from here. Faye's antennae twitched in acknowledgement. Be careful out there, she said, her enhanced pheromones conveying a complex mix of concern and dedication. Greg assembled his team and boarded their assault craft. As they approached the enormous hive mind vessel, Greg felt his enhanced physiology responding to the alien presence. There, he pointed, indicating a breach in the ship's biomechanical hull. That's our way in. The team used their specialized gear to create an airtight seal around the breach. Greg led the charge into the alien vessel, his enhanced senses on high alert. The interior was a maze of pulsing, organic corridors that seemed to shift and breathe. Stay close, Greg ordered as they encountered their first group of drones. He activated his pheromone-based weapon, releasing a concentrated burst that immediately disrupted the drone's coordination. The team moved swiftly, taking advantage of the confusion to push deeper into the ship. Back at the command center, Faye directed the defense of the integration centers. Her mind processed multiple data streams simultaneously, coordinating the movements of their hybrid fighter squadrons. Squadron leaders form up on Vector 227, Faye commanded. Concentrate fire on those smaller ships trying to penetrate the pheromone barrier. The effectiveness of the hybrid pilots was immediately apparent. Their enhanced reflexes and intuitive understanding of both human and Wadi technology allowed them to outmaneuver the hive mind ships with ease. Explosions bloomed in the space around the core worlds as enemy vessels fell to the precise attacks of the defenders. On the hive mind command ship, Greg's team fought their way through increasingly dense swarms of drones. The air was thick with the acrid smell of their biomechanical bodies and the sweet, cloying scent of the pheromone weapons. The central control node should be just ahead, Greg said, gesturing to a massive doorway pulsing with energy. Cover me while I interface with it. As his team formed a protective perimeter, Greg placed his hand on the alien console. He felt a jolt as his consciousness merged with the ship's systems. The sensation was overwhelming, a cacophony of alien thoughts and commands flooding his mind. Greg gritted his teeth, pushing through the mental assault. He found the ship's navigation controls and, with a focused effort, overrode them. The massive vessel shuddered as Greg redirected it on a collision course with a cluster of smaller hive mind ships. "We've got incoming," one of his team members shouted. "And they're not drones." Greg disengaged from the console just as a group of human figures burst into the room. Their eyes were wild, filled with a fanatical light that Greg recognized immediately. "Purists," he growled, dropping into a fighting stance. The narrow corridor erupted into chaos as Greg's enhanced team clashed with the purist saboteurs. Greg's movements were a blur, his reflexes allowing him to dodge blows and counter with lightning speed. He found himself face-to-face with the purist leader, a burly man whose face was contorted with rage. "Abomination!" the man spat, swinging a makeshift weapon at Greg's head. Greg ducked under the blow and surged forward, using his enhanced strength to grapple with the larger man. They crashed into the organic wall of the corridor, the ship's flesh pulsing beneath them as they struggled. With a swift movement, Greg broke the purist's grip and delivered a precise strike to a nerve cluster, incapacitating him. The rest of his team had similarly subdued the other saboteurs. "Secure them and move out," Greg ordered. "This ship is about to become very unfriendly." They sprinted back through the twisting corridors, dragging their captives with them. Greg felt the ship lurch as it neared its collision course. They reached their entry point just as the first impact shook the vessel. "Go, go, go!" Greg shouted, ushering his team and the prisoners through the breach and back onto their assault craft. They disengaged from the doomed command ship moments before it plowed into the enemy cluster, the resulting explosion illuminating space like a newborn star. As Greg's team returned to the central command station, they were met with a flurry of activity. Dr. Eleanor Reeves rushed up to them, her eyes wide with excitement. "You need to see this," she said, leading them to a secured lab area. Inside, they found a group of hive mind drones in containment fields. But unlike the mindless automatons they had fought, these drones were exhibiting strange behavior. Some paced their enclosures, while others seemed to be attempting rudimentary communication with each other. "The pheromone mist," Dr. Reeves explained. "Prolonged exposure is causing mutations in the drones that breach the atmosphere. They're developing individuality." Greg and Faye exchanged a look of amazement. This unexpected development could change the entire course of the war. "We need to capture more of these mutated drones," Faye said. "The information they could provide—" Her words were cut off by a deafening alarm. A technician called out, his voice tight with fear. "Massive object detected entering the system. It's a hive mind mothership." The main display flickered to life, showing a colossal vessel that dwarfed even the command ship Greg had just destroyed. It moved with ponderous grace, surrounded by a swarm of smaller craft. Greg's mind raced, analyzing the threat and formulating a plan. He turned to Faye, their enhanced physiologies allowing them to communicate volumes in a single glance. "We need to infiltrate that mothership," Greg said, his voice filled with unwavering drive. "It's the key to ending this war." Faye nodded, already calling up personnel files on her console. "I'll assemble the best team we have. We'll need every advantage we can get." As the command center erupted into a frenzy of preparation, Greg stared at the image of the approaching mothership. He knew that the next few hours would determine the fate of both human and Wadi civilizations. The final battle was about to begin. The final battle was about to unfold, and Greg knew they had only one chance to turn the tide. "Prepare the stealth ship," Greg ordered, his voice cutting through the tension in the command center. "We're going in." As Greg assembled his infiltration team, Faye's fingers flew across the holographic interface, coordinating a massive diversionary attack. The plan was daring, perhaps even reckless, but it was their best hope of ending the war. "Launching attack squadrons now," Faye announced, her antennae twitching with nervous energy. "Good luck, Greg. Come back to me." Greg nodded, his enhanced physiology allowing him to convey volumes of emotion in a single look. Then he was gone, leading his team to the waiting stealth ship. The journey to the mothership was tense. The stealth ship's advanced cloaking technology, their only protection against the swarm of enemy vessels. Greg's enhanced senses were on high alert, every nerve crackling with anticipation as they approached the colossal hive mind vessel. Initiating docking sequence, the pilot announced, his voice barely above a whisper. With a soft thud, the stealth ship attached itself to the mothership's hull. Greg led his team through the airlock, their specialized gear allowing them to cut through the alien material and create an entrance. The interior of the mothership was a maze of pulsing, organic corridors that seemed to breathe and shift around them. Greg's enhanced senses allowed him to navigate the alien environment, leading his team deeper into the heart of the vessel. "Stay alert," Greg warned, his voice low. "We've encountered minimal resistance so far, but that won't last." As if on cue, a group of Hive mind drones rounded a corner ahead of them. Greg's team reacted instantly, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to dispatch the threat before it could raise an alarm. Back at the command center, Faye coordinated the external battle, her mind processing multiple data streams simultaneously. Suddenly, an urgent message from Dr. Reeves flashed across her screen. "Faye, the mutated drones have revealed critical information." Dr. Reeves's voice crackled through the comm. "The Queen emits a unique pheromone that controls the entire species. A powerful burst of our hybrid pheromones could disrupt this control." Faye's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "Understood, Doctor. I'm relaying this to Greg's team now." Inside the mothership, Greg received Faye's transmission. He quickly adjusted their plan, directing the team toward the central chamber where the Queen resided. As they pushed deeper into the ship, resistance increased. Elite hive mind warriors emerged from hidden chambers, their attacks more coordinated and deadly than the drones they had encountered earlier. Greg unleashed a burst of concentrated pheromones, momentarily disorienting a group of warriors. "Push through," he shouted, using his enhanced strength to clear a path for his team. The battle was fierce, the narrow corridors echoing with the sounds of combat. Greg's team suffered casualties, but they pressed on, knowing the fate of their civilizations hung in the balance. In the command center, Faye orchestrated a daring maneuver. "All defense stations, prepare for synchronized blast on my mark," she ordered. "Pheromone warheads standing by." The defense network fired in unison, creating a temporary gap in the mothership's shields. Faye didn't hesitate. "Launch pheromone warheads now!" The warheads streaked through space, penetrating the mothership's hull and dispersing their payload internally. Greg's team finally reached the central chamber, a massive biomechanical arena dominated by the towering figure of the hive mind queen. Her alien beauty was terrifying, waves of controlling pheromones emanating from her form. Greg felt the queen's pheromones assault his mind, but his enhanced physiology allowed him to resist. He realized their unique abilities gave them an unexpected advantage. "Form a circle," Greg commanded his team. "Join hands and focus on amplifying our pheromones." As the queen launched a psychic assault, Greg and his team released a concentrated burst of human-Wadi hybrid pheromones. The two pheromone fields clashed in a spectacular display, filling the chamber with swirling, bioluminescent colors. The combined effect of the team's pheromone burst and the dispersing warheads from Faye's attack created a cascading reaction throughout the mothership. Confusion spread among the hive mind drones, their collective consciousness beginning to fracture. The queen, sensing the threat to her control, lashed out physically at Greg. He met her attack head-on, their enhanced strengths evenly matched as they grappled in the center of the chamber. Greg managed to pin the queen, pressing his hand against her central nervous cluster. Using his ability to interface with alien technology, he established a direct neural link. Through this connection, Greg transmitted the full force of human and Wadi emotions, experiences, and individuality. The queen's mind, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of individual consciousness, began to fracture. As the queen's control weakened, a shockwave of awareness spread throughout the hive mind species. Across the battlefield, drones and warriors suddenly ceased their attacks, experiencing individual thought for the first time. Greg maintained the connection, his knees going weak from the intensity of the experience. He could feel the queen's consciousness shifting, fragmenting and reforming as the concept of individuality took hold. Around him, his team worked to secure the chamber and stabilize the mothership systems. The battle wasn't over yet, but a monumental shift had occurred. The hive mind, once a relentless enemy, was transforming before their eyes. As Greg finally broke the neural link, exhausted but triumphant, he received a transmission from Faye. Her voice, filled with a mix of relief and amazement, came through clearly. Greg, we're seeing unprecedented changes across the battlefield. The hive mind forces have stopped attacking. What's happening in there? Greg looked around the chamber, watching as former hive mind drones began to exhibit signs of individual behavior. Some seemed confused, others curious, but none showed the mindless aggression of before. "We've done it, Faye," Greg replied, his voice heavy with the weight of their achievement. "We've broken the Queen's control. The hive mind is free." As Greg and his team began the process of securing the Queen and stabilizing the situation, he knew that their work was nowhere near the end. The implications of what they had accomplished were staggering, and the challenges ahead were numerous. But for now, as he watched former enemies begin to explore their newfound individuality, Greg allowed himself a moment of hope. They had changed the course of the war, and perhaps the future of their civilizations, in ways they had never imagined possible.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.